All right, call to order the May 3rd, 2022 meeting of the North Andover Planning Board. Pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, this meeting, as well as the public hearings that we're about to we have annual town meeting zoning bylaw amendment article and 1160 and 1116 Great Pond Road are going to be continued public hearings. This meeting, as well as those public hearings of the North Andover Planning Board, will be conducted in person and via remote means in accordance with applicable law. Specific information on the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and or parties with a right and or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the town's website at www.northandoverma.gov. For this meeting, in-person attendance of members of the public and board members will be permitted. Members of the public who wish to watch the meeting live may do so on their televisions by tuning to Comcast Channel 8, Verizon Channel 26, or online at www.northandovercam.org. Every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event that we are unable to do so despite best efforts, we will post on the Town of North Andover website an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceeding as soon as possible after the meeting and after the public hearings. If the public would like to participate in any public hearings but not attend the meeting in person, please email your question or comment prior to or during the meeting or hearing to Jean Enright at jenright@northandoverma.gov. The question or comment will be read during the proceeding and responded to accordingly. Jean, could you take roll for us?
Sure. Kelly Cormier,
Here.
Alyssa Koenig.
Here remotely.
Okay, Kelly's also remote. Sean Kevelin.
Here.
John Simons.
Here.
Rayton Goldberg.
Here.
And Peter Boynton.
Here.
Okay, continued public hearings, annual town meeting zoning bylaw amendment articles. Article 27, amend the zoning bylaw to establish an inclusionary housing requirement bylaw. Gina, are there any new comments that have come in?
One resident comment did come in,
Okay, could you read that?
so
Or I can read it if you have. Do I have it?
that's the one I just gave you.
About the inclusionary zoning? Which one is that?
Rural Crest redevelopment?
So that's not the inclusionary zoning, though?
No.
Okay, so.
Oh, I'm
just-
sorry, you
yeah.
said inclusionary. So no comments have come in on inclusionary?
Inclusionary, yes. No comments have come in on the inclusionary zoning. No new information, correct?
No.
Any members of the board have questions or comments that they want to raise about the inclusionary zoning? Any members of the public present that want to say something about the inclusionary zoning? Continue that until May 17th?
Yes.
At what time? Have we decided?
Town meeting, I hear, is 6:30, so we'll meet at 5:45 if everybody can make it.
Let's do, could we do 5:30? Let's try for 5:30.
5:30, okay.
If it's 6:30, just 'cause I want people to have time to check in and things like that. May 17th, Tuesday, May 17th at 5:30. We will meet at one of the rooms of the high school, is that correct?
Yep, so once I get that room, it'll be on the agenda.
And generally, as past practice, the chair does bring dinner to that meeting.
Last year,
Yeah,
you brought some fancy stuff.
yeah,
You
that's,
did well, John. That was usually what, Capitol Grill?
Oh, yeah, I think so, yeah.
that's all right. That's weird that I'm just hearing about this now.
That's right.
Okay. Articles 28 and 29, amend the zoning bylaw to establish Article 19, mixed-use overlay district, as well as amend the zoning map of the town of North Andover. Any changes to our article?
No.
Any board members have questions or comments? Any members of the public that are here have questions or comments? We do have one comment that came in. I'm going to read that. And then if anyone wants to discuss it, they can. And again, as always, I am reading the email or comment. It is not my opinion or the opinion on the board. It is solely the opinion of the person who sent it. This one is from Joe Finn, 48 Surrey Drive. Dear members of the planning board, I'm writing to express my concern over the possibility of Merrimack College purchasing as many as 199 townhouses at the new development site as part of their strategic growth plan, and in turn placing a significant tax burden on the residents of North Andover. There is mounting evidence to suggest Merrimack College intends to purchase as many parcels as possible as a means of growing into a significantly larger college or university. Merrimack College, in addition to occupying newly built dormitories on the new site, are possibly poised to purchase the majority, if not all, of the 199 townhouses at Royal Crest, creating a substantial loss in tax revenue for the town. My concern is evidently shared by town officials as reflected in their recently signed development agreement between the town and the developer. Based on the agreement, in the event that Merrimack College purchases a townhouse and/or any commercial property, the town is requiring the developer to contribute an amount equivalent to the value of the taxes for a period of 10 years following the conveyance of property to compensate for loss of tax revenue. What is most concerning about this agreement is that after the 10-year period, the town's taxpayers would then shoulder the loss of that revenue in perpetuity. This potential scenario also calls into question the accuracy of the projected financial impact of the project, which is based in large part on the amount of property taxes to be collected by the town. On the one hand, the town acknowledges the potential for Merrimack to purchase large amounts of parcels and therefore incur significant loss of tax revenue. On the other hand, provides the residents with a financial impact amount that does not account for any loss of tax revenue from the potential purchases of parcels by the college. 2, pattern of property purchases. Merrimack College has already purchased housing property in Andover only to convert the residential property to college use, causing the town of Andover to lose significant tax revenue. Additionally, Merrimack College recently purchased 2 office buildings in North Andover for college use, causing North Andover to lose significant tax revenues. The college has apparently obtained a demolition permit for one of the buildings to erect a new building as part of their engineering department. It is important to note that Merrimack College failed to notify the town in an apparent attempt to hide their overall intentions prior to the planning board voting on the project during their April 5th meeting. 3, Merrimack College strategic plan is highlighted on their website. Merrimack College plans to significantly grow their campus, athletic facilities, academic buildings, and undergraduate enrollment over the next 5 to 10 years. Based upon their plans, it appears improbable that such initiatives can be accomplished on their current undersized campus without moving administrative and student populations away from their main campus onto the newly developed site. In fact, this is already happening. A quick tour of the campus reveals limited dining options, wholly inadequate athletic facilities, and a lack of space for additional academic buildings and/or outdoor functions. Just in terms of athletic facilities, Merrimack College's goal is to become an NCAA Division I institution, expand into collegiate sports, enhance and grow clubs, and feature distinctive intramural programs, end quote. As of last year, the NCAA approved Merrimack College as a Division I athletic institution, yet their facilities don't look anything like a Division I college in many instances. For instance, their D1 basketball facility is smaller than North Andover's high school facility. Their D1 baseball team plays at Greater Lawrence Tech's high school, undersized field. Their D1 tennis team plays at North Andover High School, and the list goes on. Likely, the students and administrative personnel would have to be moved to accommodate much-needed space on their main campus to fill their overall strategic plan. If Merrimack College goes ahead and purchases some, if not all, of the townhouses as well as the commercial property is acknowledged as a real possibility by the town's development agreement and Merrimack's previous purchasing patterns, I believe the planning board, select board, and town board should share this possibility with North Andover residents at town meeting. Don't you? Thank you for the opportunity to share my concerns. Since I'm unable to attend your meeting, I hope you can read this into the record. Sincerely, Joe Finn. So it has been read into the record. I guess I'm not really sure I understand where that falls in terms of for or against the project. So I mean, it just seems if if Merrimack wants to purchase properties in town, obviously, when they do, those by law are not taxed as long as they're being used for educational purposes. But I'm not sure how the project going forward or not going forward influences that. It seems to me they could, if the project didn't go forward, they could buy property. If the project did go forward, at least there's a agreement and avenues and a plan. So I don't know. I mean, this is the first I'm hearing of the 199 townhouses being potentially purchased. That doesn't seem like a likely scenario to me, but that's all I got on that. I don't know. If anyone else wants to comment, they can. Do you want to? You don't have to. If you want to, you're here.
It's not why I'm here, but Jeff Doggett, Merrimack College and resident of North Andover. So I read that Mr. Finn believes that the project go forward, so I'm happy with that. I would just say a couple of things. Number one, when Merrimack College first started the conversation with AIMCO, we did have an opportunity to grow into a larger portion of that project. We chose the location, we chose the amount of acreage, and we chose the uses. So to look at it as we went through all of that for 2 years and then decided later that we would go and buy 199 units, which I recall, I think, from a previous meeting The rough estimate of that cost was about $700,000 a unit. And I think if you just multiply that out, you're probably going to get to the equal cost of what the value of the property is today. So I just don't think that would be a very good business model for anyone to go on. And I think I've said something similar to that from the podium. So I would just reiterate that. And the last thing I would say is there are a number of things in there that I personally don't find to be accurate, especially as it relates to our Division I athletic program. Our athletic program compared to other schools within our conference are actually comparable, if not better, including basketball, where he's referring to a basketball court where we play some of our games, but we also play some of our games now in Lawler Arena on top of the ice rink, and we've gone from one of the smallest basketball courts in our conference to the largest. So I don't really understand what all of that is about, but nevertheless, I don't want to miss the opportunity to defend the institution and its plans in terms of athletics. And I think that covers it.
Okay. Thank you. Thank
Thanks.
you, Jeff. Okay, any other comments come in?
No.
Any other public comments or board comments? Excellent. All right, so we will now move this gladly to May 17th.
Yes.
And just a reminder for everyone, that's town meeting. Please show up. All right, bring your friends. Okay, 1160 and 1116. Well, do we want to do that? Hold on. Why don't we do the, Jeff Dirk's here, right? Yeah. Why don't we do the townwide traffic study, because that's tangentially related to what we just talked about, and we have him here. So why don't we do that first? So we're doing a discussion item 5, townwide traffic study, Jeffrey Dirk, Vanessa and Associates.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, Jeffrey Dirk with Vanessa and Associates, the town's transportation consultant with regards to the townwide traffic study. Before I get into the presentation, it might be just helpful to provide some context as to kind of what the scope of our assessment is. There were two pieces of it, and tonight I'm going to present the initial part of our assessment. The board's discussing a lot of articles tonight, some of them relating to development projects in the town, which we have, at least with respect to the Royal Crest project, been assisting the board with understanding the impacts on the town's transportation infrastructure. One of the outcomes of that, and a lot of the questions that had come up, is with respect to, from the standpoint of the average citizen, understanding what does it mean in terms of travel times throughout the community. So depending on where I live in the town, today it takes me a certain amount of time, let's say, to get to Interstate 93 or to come to Town Hall. As developments, projects happen within the community, how is that going to affect kind of those real world conditions, which is how long does it take me to get from point A to point B on a typical basis. As a part of our assessment, we've undertaken an evaluation of those travel times throughout the town, and there's specific major travel routes that we evaluated. The intent of what we've put together, and I'll be presenting tonight in terms of the initial findings, is to develop a map for the community where you could look at any roadway network within the town and understand what are the travel times today, the average travel times, and then what those travel times may look like in the future. So an estimation of, as these projects are brought online and just as general traffic growth happens within the community, how is it going to affect the average citizen's travel times? And when you look at the mapping that we put together, you could pick any route within the community, the major roads, and then add up the travel times along each of the road segments and figure out how long does it take me, depending on my travel route, to travel through the community. And next slide, Jude. So in terms of some of the initial findings of our assessment, be able to scroll up
Sorry.
if it's not cooperating.
I'm sorry. Well, 1 second.
So as Jean's, oh, perfect, that's great, Jean, thank you. So the first part of it obviously is to understand what the existing travel times are on the roadway network. So we undertook a pretty extensive data collection effort, actually after school vacation period was done, so that we're looking at conditions with public schools back in session. Everyone unfortunately back from vacation, although I'm sure they would prefer to still be on vacation. So the travel patterns from the standpoint of we'll call it after COVID, or we're still in the midst of it to some extent, conditions in terms of travel times on the roadway. So as we looked at major travel routes, and I'll show you what those roadways are within the community, we actually drove each of the road segments that I'm going to show to you. We did them 4 times during both peak and off-peak times. So you drive in one direction with a stopwatch. The way it's done is it's performed by what's known as a floating car method. So the floating car method is that as you're driving in your vehicle, you're following the predominant flow of traffic or the speed of traffic on the roadway. So if there's congestion and a lot of vehicles in front of you during peak travel periods, you're flowing within that speed, that volume of traffic, and generally following what the general traffic patterns are during that time period. There are some roadways, such as Great Pond Road, heading over towards Boxford where there may be not a lot of traffic, and so what we try to do is stay within a 5-mile-an-hour pace of the speed limit. So your travel time is really conditioned upon the speed limit on the roadway. So we don't speed to try to get to the point as quickly as possible. So we're driving within a 5-mile-an-hour travel speed. So again, 4 times down, back, down, back, and then we average those speeds, or average the travel times, and we note at each point that we stop along the roadway. So if you're stopped at a traffic light, the watch keeps going because that's in your travel time. So it's actual time that you're spent on the roadway network itself. In terms of looking at the future conditions, that's how we establish kind of the existing conditions. Looking at the future conditions, we worked with Gene to understand the development projects that are happening in the town. As this board is reviewing projects and requiring traffic studies, transportation professionals such as myself is producing information to you. That information includes not only the volume of traffic that a project is going to generate, but how it impacts the town's roadway infrastructure. So from that, we can look at each of the intersections that are studied, what is the increase in delay that occurs? So then we can look into the future and see, okay, as traffic volumes grow, and as we add this project from these additional developments at critical intersections along the roadway where you need to stop or where there may be delays, these models that are produced as a part of this traffic analysis produces for us increased delay. So then we can take those traffic analyses, look at them in composite, and then estimate what the increased delay would be at major intersections along each of those roadways, and then add that on top of what we count for the existing conditions. The other piece of it, and looking at the Route 114 corridor in particular, is we know there are road improvements. So Royal Crest as well as MassDOT is going to be implementing some road improvements, including road widening, signal retiming, and the adaptive signal system that we've talked about. So that produces some net benefit to some extent. Some of that net benefit, as we've talked about before, is offset by the increase in traffic. So we're also accounting for those type of conditions. Next slide, Gene. So this slide, very small to see, but I know that, oh, thank you, Gene. This shows the roadway network within the town, and the town boundary is shown in the dashed line. So what you see in terms of the major roadways, you can see Route 133, Route 125, Route 114, all a part of our study area, Mass Ave, Main Street, Waverly Road, Elm Street. So all of the major arterials within the town is where we've undertaken our transportation analysis. So again, the intent as you look at the color coding here is that we've measured the travel times along each of these roadway segments so that you can pick anywhere that you live within the community and then add up the travel times along each of these roads to get to whatever point you're arriving at, and you can come up with what your total travel time is to reach any portion within the town itself. Next slide, Gene. So this slide here shows our existing travel times within the study area. So again, as we average the four travel times that we measure on each of these road segments, this is what was produced in terms of the time to travel on each of these color-coded roadway segments. So you can see, just by way of example, the Andover bypass, because it's just an easy one to pick out here. Let's see if I can highlight that here. So if you're traveling from Route 114 down to Route 28, it's about a quarter of a mile. And today, if you drive that route, the little impediment to flow, you have one traffic signal essentially down where the state police barracks are. But essentially, it's about 4.4 miles. I'm sorry, yeah, it's 4.4 miles, and it takes you just about 15 to 20 minutes to travel that stretch of road. Again, because there's really little impediment to traffic flow in the area there. We've broken the Route 114. Yeah.
So it says 6.25 minutes. Is that per mile, or is that 6.25 minutes?
That's the total, so when you see the minutes, that's the total travel time to travel the length of the roadway that's listed there. So whatever, if it's got so many miles, that's the number of minutes to travel over that stretch of roadway.
You just said it
Yeah.
was 15.
That's confusing.
It's it's 0.25, I'm sorry, 6.25.
6.25 minutes
Yeah.
for that 4.4
Correct.
miles.
4.4 miles.
Okay.
Yes, that's a good, yes, thank you.
Yeah, all right.
And is
Helpful.
this for that 4.4 miles is just for a portion of the bypass,
Just
or is
for,
that the entire
it
bypass?
is, it's basically the stretch from, and I should actually look at what I've got in front of me. It's the stretch from Route 114 to Route 28. So it's just that stretch. We are trying to quantify the travel times to the boundaries of the town essentially as we're looking at it.
Okay, thank you.
So you can go to the next slide, Gene. So this is a blow-up of the area that is 114, 125, and Route 133. So this is the area as you're discussing the Royal Crest project. You can see the Route 114 corridor in this section here. So this area here, because it's very concentrated, there's a lot of traffic signals, so we broke this section up into various roadway segments, so that again, as you're traveling on any one of these legs, you can assess what the travel times are. So this is essentially from Haverhill Street here down to about the bypass. It's 0.8 miles. The travel time is 1.25 minutes. It's a relatively short segment, but your travel times are increased along that segment because we know that you've got, traffic signals along this section, at least 2 or 3 of them to get through before you get down to the Andover bypass. And so it's the same thing. You can go through any of these roadway segments, and again, travel time and distance in the area. Next slide, Gene. So we've taken the same conditions, applied the traffic from several projects in the area, Royal Crest being one of them, the Amazon facility being another one of those, and I'll speak about that in terms of its impacts and travel time in the area. The Princeton Development Project, the mixed-use project on 125 was included. So we've listed a number of development projects that are included in this, the future condition travel times. And this is 7 years in the future. The reason the 7-year horizon was selected, because that's consistent with a lot of traffic studies that you've been reviewing. They typically all have a 7-year planning horizon. So as you're looking at those projects and their transportation assessments, we're modeling or matching the horizon year for our travel time assessment that would be consistent with what you'll be seeing in those traffic studies themselves. So what I wanted to point out is this section up here in particular. So this is the section of 125 that's most influenced by both the Princeton Properties development as well as the Amazon facility. The Amazon facility is probably the most pronounced traffic addition to that section of the roadway corridor. And what you see there is this 2.5 mile section. In the future, it's about 6 minutes of travel time compared to the existing condition. It's about 1 minute and 30 seconds of additional travel time along that section. To put that in context, a typical traffic signal, if you arrive on a red light, it takes about 60 seconds for it to come back around to give you a green light, 60 to 90 seconds. So we're talking about something where the additional travel time is essentially one entire cycle of a traffic signal. So, that's quite significant in terms of increased travel time along that section itself. Next slide, Gene. So this is, again, that blown up area. So we do see that there is increased delays along Route 114. They do result from the Royal Crest project itself. And those travel time increases along that corridor, when we factor in the MassDOT improvement project and the adaptive traffic signal system, it's about 30 seconds of additional delay in terms of how long it would take you to get through the area. The reason for that is because of the adaptive signal system. But again, to put it in context, if it takes 60 seconds for a traffic signal to cycle all the way through, you're talking about half a cycle of a traffic signal. That increased travel time is why, as we've been discussing Royal Crest, what you see is the length of the queues at the intersection, because it's going to take you 30 more seconds to get through a traffic signal. If that signal has a 60 to 90 second cycle, you can see you're waiting about half a cycle to be able to get through the intersection itself. Next slide, Gene. So this is a high-level view of kind of the critical areas where we had noted some increases in travel time. So along Route 133, the segment between Route 114 and Main Street, If you compare it to current conditions, we're expecting about 30 seconds of additional travel time for that one segment. And then further on from Main Street to Route 125 is an additional 30 seconds. So again, the intent here is if you wanted to travel along Route 133 from Route 114 to Route 125, you can see it's 30 seconds plus another 30 seconds. So it's about a minute of additional travel time along that section of roadway. And the intent of the graphics we prepared is to allow you to do that summation so that anyone can look at where you live in the community and look at what the increased travel time is on any of those road segments and arrive at kind of how much longer it's going to take you to get from point A to point B. So on Route 25, again, Route 125, again, we've noted a couple of things between Route 28 and 114. Route 114, we're expecting about 45 seconds of additional delay on that section. And then we talked already about between Great Pond Road and Industrial Road, again, because of the Amazon project in particular, about a minute, 30 seconds of additional delay or travel time on that section. And then the Route 114, we've broken it up into those three segments. So between 495 and Haverhill Street is about 30 seconds. Haverhill Street to the 125 bypass adds about 45 seconds of additional delay in the future. And then between 125 the bypass and the Middleton Town line, it's about 30 seconds of additional delay. I think that's the last slide I have, Gene. So there are some things in terms of additional information will be provided. I think probably something that would be more helpful is a similar color-coded graphic that looks at what the travel time increases are along the roadway segment. So we have existing travel times, future travel times, but I think the real thing is a graphic that says plus 30 seconds, plus 45 seconds. So I think that'll help with anyone being able to look at the graphics themselves, understand the study and how it was performed, and then assess what their increased travel times would be in the community. So I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have now or later on in the evening.
Okay, hold on. I see a hand raised, but I'm going to wait. I'm going to see if any board members have questions or comments first, because I might answer your question, and then you can come up after that. Kelly, Alyssa?
I do have a couple of questions.
Go ahead, Kelly.
This is great, thank you. It's a great view to be able to see factual data of what are our times on the road versus what are they going to be with the things that we know about now, both already permitted and not yet. So I just want to make sure, if you wouldn't mind, I just want to make sure I'm understanding it correctly, bringing up slide 5. So what I did just to kind of put some numbers behind it, because I think this was one of the things that I had heard people were looking for, is kind of what's the overall impact to someone's commute or trip. So I kind of said, all right, coming in off of the bypass, so that what I think is Route 1, and then I said, okay, how long is it now to get to the corner of Mass Ave and 133? So I added up Route 1, Route 5, and Route 18.
Yes.
The numbers, right? And I got to, as of right now, if my math is correct, it's 10 minutes and 15 seconds on average.
Yes.
That was today's conditions. And then I took the 2029 conditions, added up those same numbers, and got 11 minutes.
Yes.
Right, so pretty small.
Right.
At least if my math is correct, right?
Correct.
It's a 45-second addition.
Right.
With all these projects for that commute.
Correct.
Halfway down the bypass
Yep.
to Mass Ave.
That's right. And again, to just kind of put it in context as I described it, because we have a lot of signals along that section, your typical traffic signal operates on about a 60 to 90 second cycle. So if you look at it in terms of, well, how long is it going to take me to get through these additional lights, you're talking about something more, close to a half or 3/4 of a signal cycle, basically, is what you're talking about for increased delay that you'd be waiting.
Okay, great. So thank you. That means that puts fact behind all of us sitting there in the commute waiting, right? And kind of feeling that. One question, so the information, you said you did it both at, I think it said peak and
Peak and off-peak.
non-peak times. Is there any, I know in this, what you're showing here is the average.
Yes.
Is there any data or any kind of larger numbers in the commute times where there's heavier traffic potentially that we might also want to consider as we look at this? Or
Yeah,
did it really average out no streets?
Most of the roadways themselves, in terms of during the weekday, that's heavy traffic most of the time period. So in terms of the peak versus off-peak during the weekdays, there wasn't a significant difference. It might have been 5 or 10 seconds of additional delay one way or the other, but nothing that was significant. That's why we did the averaging of them. Delays during the morning in particular were found to be a little bit heavier on certain roads. So I guess it varies depending on where you are. If you're closer to where one of the schools are, the traffic patterns and the delays are a little bit different. Same thing with what was going on at Merrimack College in terms of class turnovers and changeovers there. So it does vary just given the nature of the types of land uses that are along the corridor.
But you were saying between peak and non-peak, it was a handful of seconds.
It was, and it varies throughout
Per
the
route.
town, yes. Yeah, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
I'll do Alyssa, and then I'll come to, if you have any, just.
I have no comments.
Okay, Peter?
Yeah, I'd really like to know what the difference in travel time is for these routes during peak travel. I understand, if I understand correctly, you have average peak and non-peak. I guess I can understand a logic to do that, but as a commuter, I really want to know what's the difference at when I'm sitting in traffic and that's peak.
Right.
So I'm just a little concerned that by averaging, we're flattening the difference a little bit. But whether we are or not, can you give us, you talked about another graphic. I agree with you that the third graphic of what is the delta,
Right.
I agree, would be most valuable. I guess I'm asking, I'd like a fourth graphic, which is what are those delta times for peak hours?
we can
Without
produce that.
averaging peak and non-peak.
Yes, we can produce that.
Thank you, that's very helpful. And once again, great job.
Thank you.
I had a question just about just how you gather. So what do you, is there any data that gets tossed? So like, let's say you're going down 114 and you come to a stop and you have a 10-minute stop because there was an accident.
Right.
Is that something that you can keep in, or do you disregard as in?
We would toss that. If there
Okay.
was anything that was noted that was an anomaly like that, we wouldn't use the data.
Okay, I was just curious about that. Okay.
So I have a question on that. Why would you toss that? Because that's life.
Well, unless it's something that's a regular occurrence, we wouldn't put it in.
Okay. It seems like it might be a regular concern, occurrence. in
Right.
places, But, I mean, that's part of the commuting life, right? There's an accident, someone fixing a tire, right? That I would think, was there any of those that you excluded here?
No, not that I'm aware
Data?
of, no.
Okay. That may be interesting too, if you come back, if there was any excluded kind of anomalies.
Yeah, as far as I know, we wouldn't include any data if there was an anomaly, we would note it.
Go ahead, John.
So I actually just have two questions.
Mr.
So-
Chairman, can I just ask for, I'm just going to take
Yeah.
a break for a second, just to kind of head to the restroom for a
Oh,
second? Yeah.
go ahead.
Thanks.
Go
Thank
ahead.
you.
Restroom break.
So speaking of traveling roads and like anomalies, last night when I was coming home from, my wife had her surgery yesterday, so we were coming home last night, and she was fine and everything. And so I was coming down Stroh Drive, it was probably about 9 o'clock. All of a sudden, 2 state troopers swung across the road, stopped the traffic, like, almost like had a slash on your brakes. What's going on? Then I look ahead, there was a truck that had gone on Storrow.
I got starred.
Well,
Stir.
fortunately, he was smart enough that he didn't hit the thing, so they backed him up,
Got him off.
got him off, and put us on our way. It was really slick. I mean, people dump on the state troopers at times, but man, that was artful what they did. I couldn't believe, how well choreographed that was.
I wonder if the guy realized, or somebody must have
Oh,
called.
no, he was driving slowly, because it was,
Because you don't-
right by the hospitals there, and yeah.
I mean, that's notorious with move-in, move-out days, right?
Yeah.
So just people don't realize.
Yeah.
I like these graphics though and the information. This will be something that will be really useful, even as we go forward with anything else to be able to take and use this as a baseline for traffic.
This would be the standard on which others are modeled.
Yeah, there you go.
Exactly. You kind of have this and go, here's what it is now, what's the impact to this?
This is what we want. Okay, all right, yeah, yes, have seats. Sean, questions?
So just two questions. Yeah,
Sure.
no problem. So for your 2029 numbers, so is that assuming steady state? In other words, like everything is complete, like it's fully occupied and you're doing the normal traffic flows from that? Okay.
All
Yeah.
the development projects that we had mentioned, we're assuming that those are all constructed, all the traffic's realized from those projects, and then those improvements along Route 114 are constructed and operational.
Awesome. And the second question is, do you do inbound and outbound flows?
We do it in
Okay.
both directions.
Okay.
Yeah, we did not find a significant variation in terms of the directionality of the difference in the travel times. It's really the cycling of the traffic signals that are controlling the flow of traffic. The way the signals are operating along most of the major corridors is it lets the mainline traffic go at the same time.
Got it.
So that's why we didn't see a lot of variation in terms of travel times in one direction versus the other.
Got it. And during those calculations, where do you delineate where inbound and outbound is? Like,
So what we did was outbound would be heading out of the community versus
Okay.
going, so that's how we.
so
did it.
basically on the line of the town?
Correct,
Okay, gotcha.
yes.
Okay.
John, anything else?
Yeah, I know you probably mentioned it, but how many data points, like, for each of those? I'm just trying to get some idea whether, whether there was any kind of standard deviation and.
So it's a minimum of 4 travel runs is
Yeah.
typically what is done. It's once back and forth, basically twice along the roadway segment.
Okay. I mean, Peter, a little bit to your point from earlier is that, when you travel as a commuter, you notice, and one of the things that I've noticed is that there's a lot of variability days of the week, like it's just some days it's absolutely crazy, other days it's, wow, there's nothing there, and there's no logical reason for it always, and I mean, just how do you deal with that? How do you know you're getting the extremes and,
Right.
representative sample?
So we, even with doing traffic counts, we do not do traffic counts on Mondays and Fridays. So those are where your variations happen. What I would say is typically in this, COVID has thrown things out of whack. And I think you've probably read a lot about traffic patterns, traffic volumes coming back, but the time of day that they're occurring as well as on specific roadways is much different than what was experienced before. Generally, what we find in terms of days of the week is Thursday is your worst case condition. Mondays, traffic tends to be a little bit, Mondays, the pattern is, I think, a little bit different as people are trying to get back into the mode of going back to work. Friday, we have a lot of people that head out early or may take the Friday off. So the traffic volumes tend to be a little bit lower. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday is generally average. Wednesday is about average. Thursdays, if you graphed it, Thursday is actually a peak condition.
Yeah.
We find a lot of congestion on Thursday.
And maybe just to add on John's question, I mean, do you typically report standard deviations? Because these are absolute values, right?
Right.
So,
I think we would look at it in terms of the variability that some of the members are mentioning, which is a standard deviation really looking at from the standpoint of the number of data points that are collected within that subset. So if we did 4 travel times, I think to some of the members' questions, which is what is that variability? So that we can see what is the standard deviation between that average, which is what we're showing here, and the peak and the non-peak, let's say, time period. And maybe that's something that would be a good thing to see as kind of a graph of that, to see what does that look like.
sure.
That would be good.
Just a quick question. One of the conditions taken into consideration was 505 Sutton Street. Sutton Street also connects up over to 495. Why was Sutton Street not considered in the data collection as an input-output point of the community?
I can take a look at that and see. I mean, it's easy enough for us to add that roadway segment into the study area. Because it is, as I'm looking at the map here, that's one area that's not colored in terms of a roadway segment that would link to some of these other roadway segments.
I'm kind of moving to a different plane here with this question, but as you've sort of observed traffic, and do you have you noticed any design issues with like the way we've laid out intersections or other things that are not proper? And, you know, I know we've cleaned up a number of them over the years, but I still feel there's probably some left that could be cleaned up, yeah.
So there's two parts really to the study. This is one part of our study. The second part of the study is exactly what you're talking about,
Yeah.
which is looking at roadway geometry and intersection geometry in particular. You can go through any community in Massachusetts in particular, but any of the Northeast states, just given the history along a lot of our roads, you know, you find geometry that's not ideal.
Yeah.
So we do try to address those. The second part of this study is looking more at roadway geometry with the goal to do some of the things that you may be discussing tonight, which is finite resources, how do we allocate those, and where are areas where we could spend some money, and maybe, you know, the improvements are something that they're not expensive to do, but it allows you to be able to kind of plan out some of those things. I also think from the standpoint of you sitting as a planning board is that, hey, if there's a development project down the road and you have something sort of like I would say you have as a master plan, you could say, listen, we've got an intersection that has some geometric problems. It looks like there's some low-cost fixes here. You know, maybe this is something, given that your project's impacting that intersection, you know, here's a roadmap to try to go and fix that. And I would say, you know, representing private developers as well, they like that because it's something, it's not nebulous. They can look at it and put a dollar value to it, and like everything else, it just eliminates that uncertainty for them. So they can know, okay, well, this is a $50,000 project, I can program it in my pro forma and kind of have at it. So that's kind of the next stage of this, which is more looking at geometric conditions, what fixes might be able to come into play, and then you have that kind of list of items where you might suggest either the community allocates money or you ask a developer that's impacting it to fix it.
Yeah.
We did that with the Avalon Bay project, their condition to give us some recommendations for the Chadwick Street, High Street.
That's exactly the
As-
thing that
yeah.
triggered my.
As well
you
as
know,
Prescott and
yeah.
High, so, yeah.
I have one and then I'll go to you. So this is sort of coming off of John's point, and I love the data that you've been able to provide. I actually have an anecdotal question about, did you notice anything in doing these traffic studies that sets North Andover apart in terms of variation in terms of traffic or different patterns or things that were incongruous to other places, similar places in the area? Or is our traffic the same as everybody else's traffic?
No, I think it's generally the same. There's nothing that we saw that was more or less an anomaly that would be unique to the town. I think from the standpoint of looking at the roadway network, you have several major routes that travel through the town. So I would say that because you have what we call them arterials essentially running through the town, you do have roadways that generally, you know, the traffic flow is pretty good, is how we would describe it. I think that as we look at some future improvements, I think what we're seeing is that there is some antiquated issues with respect to, in some cases, the traffic signals. I think to the extent that you've got state roads within the town that have opportunities for the state to spend money fixing them, sort of like as we're talking about with the adaptive signal system, that's kind of the state of the art. And I think as you're looking at a community with, you know, major development projects like this that are going on, you want to start to head in that direction with this kind of those smart traffic signals that would allow for them to adapt to changes. And some of the anomalies that we're talking about, like the roadway crashes, you know, to the extent that there's a crash on 495 or on 93 that all of a sudden has people that want to get to 495, but they can't get there because there's a crash on 93, and then they get off to the bypass and they go through the town to jump back on 495 to head north towards New Hampshire or wherever. The traffic signals they'll adapt themselves to that type of a situation that would improve traffic flow and just efficiency in the town so that residents aren't experiencing backups that are caused as a result of something that's external to the community.
That's helpful.
When you do the peak traffic measurements, is it peak morning or peak evening? Which one do you use?
Well, we measure both, and then what we're going to, I guess, present to you is what the difference is between the two, if there is a difference. One of the issues is the directionality, as was mentioned, and sometimes as we look at the directionality, morning and evening, it may be that there's not a significant difference in terms of the overall travel times along the corridor themselves. I would say just in general, what we find is the evening peak period, so the 1 hour between 4 and 6, that tends to be the heaviest traffic volume period, and that's when you're going to see slower travel speeds. Most of the backups would happen at intersections. You notice those more in the evening. However, as we were talking about Merrimack College and some of the schools in the area there, that does affect the traffic flows that may suggest that the morning time period is worse than the evening on certain roadways, as was being mentioned as well.
And with the directionality, you say you do both directions.
Yes.
I want to understand what that means. Does that mean that when you're measuring the morning peak, you do both directions?
Correct.
For the morning?
Actually, all measurements are done during.
Okay, and then in the evening, you do both
Both
directions.
directions. Right.
So I'm a little concerned about that just because of the math. If we assume for the sake of discussion that most of the roads we're analyzing are in and out of town as opposed to orthogonal, in other words, aligned with rush hour, the flow. If, let's just say you do 4 measurements in the morning rush hour, 2 rushing out and 2 in the opposite direction. You can expect, if the road is as I described, the morning rush hour out will be heavy with traffic, and at the same time, the road in is going to be pretty light.
Depends upon what's along the road itself in terms of the land use. So if you.
But let me just,
Yeah.
yes, I agree, there will be some variability, but if they're aligned with the flow of rush hour, the way the math would work, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, if there was an extra minute on a 10-minute trip going out, that'd be a 10% difference. But
Yeah.
if the traffic against rush hour is not heavy, and I mean, I would argue there is some variability, but the traffic against rush hour, at least in my decades, tends to be light. The variation there will either be less or none, but when you average those 4 numbers together, you're going to cut that 10% increase on the rush hour out in half, and it's going to artificially make that difference in rush hour peak half of what it really is, because you're averaging the numbers. I mean, that's just the way the math works. So,
Right.
I mean, I asked earlier if you can do it without averaging the peak and the non-peak.
Right.
I'd actually ask another question. Can you give us the difference in traffic times at peak in the direction of peak? Because I think it gives us a truer measure of the actual increase in delays, if I'm understanding the math correctly. But I'd welcome your comments on whether or not I'm off base on the math, with the very important caveat that the variations, depending on what's on the road, yes, I agree they exist. If there's a place that, a gas station or something, people are looping around or whatever. But if there are variations, I would still argue that as a commuter, I'm worried about the additional delays in the flow, in the direction of rush hour. I'm really not worried about the effect against rush hour. I'm just not.
So I mean, it would be good to get the data, but I think we also got to remember the geography of our town. If you go in rush hour in the morning, there's different ways, there are multiple ways that could be considered out, right?
I actually agree with that, and
Right.
it's not inconsistent with what I'm asking
No,
for.
I
because-
agree.
Because all I'm saying is on any given road, give us the difference in peak heading in the direction of rush. So no matter what direction the road is, just don't average it with the opposite lane, because I
Well,
don't
but-
understand what that gets us.
No, but so I think we can get just the true data without averaging, so that's fine. But my point is that both ways, in some places, may be considered the direction of rush, right? So like if you're on 114, some may be rushing towards 495, some may be rushing by market basket towards
Okay,
125. It may even out. We'll have to see that.
That's a fair point.
Right. We'll just have to see what the data says.
But if it actually evens out, then I would still argue, give us one, and it gives us the answer for both. If it evens out, and if it doesn't even out, give us the answer for the most congested direction. That's what I'm really asking. Because when you average the least congested, you're actually smoothing out the number.
So this is the problem with absolute values without any CVs attached to them,
Yeah.
because we don't know what the swings are, right?
But I think this could be a simple way of trying to give us a little different feel for it. Can
Right.
you do that?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, the data allows for it to be done. That's why we collect it the way that we do, to be able to, we can get down to that finite level. And I guess the only thing I would leave, it's a very valid point. We have the data to do it. I wouldn't necessarily presume that there are issues with respect to the averaging. Now, that being said, it depends on the road. I think as was mentioned, if you are on a primary residential roadway, so if you pick a roadway that's outside of kind of the central core, those variations you mentioned are probably maybe more striking. However, the directionality would be something that you would notice in terms of traffic flows heading in one direction versus the other. The travel times, though, on some of those roadways are confined by the speed limit and not so much the volume of traffic on the roadway. So as you get more towards the 114 corridor,
I don't want to interrupt you, but post-pandemic, I have not seen anybody confined by any speed limit.
I guess
I take your point. Yes, I take your point.
But we have, I guess, we have the data to be able to do exactly what
Thank
you're
you.
asking for.
Thank you. I appreciate your flexibility and openness and your patience listening to us trying to work through this.
I mean, it's a good point that I think the where it comes down to is that I think the averages are helpful, but to the point, when you're driving and there's no traffic, you don't really care if it adds another 10 seconds or 20 seconds or
Right,
30
correct.
seconds.
And if
What
there's
you
no traffic, it won't.
Right, and so what you care about is, with all these projects, when you're rushing to get out in the morning and trying to get to work, how is it really impacting me? Is it 30 seconds, or is it a minute, or is it 5 minutes? And I think that's the key point. So,
Exactly.
great, but I think it's good to come from this start and then come to that.
Yes, and the nice thing is we have the data, so to
Yeah.
the extent that the questions that you ask, we can produce, we have the data to be able to produce the information that you're asking.
Fantastic, all right, yeah, there's a question, I guess?
Should I go up there?
Yeah?
Please state your name and address.
Sure. My name is Christina Dennis, and I live on Johnson Street. In the same vein as you two gentlemen, I'm just wondering about what constitutes peak and non-peak times. I know from my personal experience of living in the vicinity of 114 that peak does not end at 6 p.m. And that traffic can be tied up much farther than your maps indicated in the direction of Middleton. So I was wondering if you had a response for what constitutes peak and non-peak. I have 4 to 6 is peak time that you took under for PM.
So in the morning, the peak hour, and I can get you an exact time, it occurs between 7 and 9 in the morning. There's a 1 hour period between 7 and 9 when generally the peak is happening. So we do our measurements within that time period. In the evening, it's generally in that 4 to 6 window, which is where you'd see a spike. What I would say is it doesn't mean that it drops off precariously, so that it doesn't all of a sudden, you rise to a peak and then all of a sudden there's no traffic. It may rise to a peak and then slowly drop off, but you may not notice a significant change in terms of the volume, because it could vary by, even if it's 100 vehicles, let's say, over the course of an hour, it may not be at the peak, but you wouldn't notice on 114 in particular if there's 100 vehicles less, because there's so much traffic on the roadway itself.
So
Right, so peak is a kind of a term of art that's used in traffic studies as a basis for trying to do comparisons, whereas rush hour, what we
I'm just wondering if,
Well-
based on my own experience of having to get to work between 4:30 and 5 p.m.,
Right.
I notice a huge uptick between if I leave my house at 4:40 as opposed to, say, 4:50. And so maybe the snapshot of that PM peak window should be kind of moved a bit to being more in the line with 5 to 7, I guess it would be, rather than 4 to 6. And I also was wondering what would constitute regular accidents? Because for the same stretch of road, I know that there are very frequent accidents going from the Middleton to the in the 495 direction on 114 with that bottleneck.
Right. So I think what I was mentioning is that when we're doing any type of data collection, if they were doing road work, let's say on Route 114, we'll equate that to like a crash. If a travel lane shut down, so it's creating all of this backup of traffic, generally hopefully that doesn't happen every single day throughout the course of the year. It may happen every once in a while, but what we're trying to measure is typical travel conditions. A typical travel condition would not involve a crash or a detour or something like that. It would involve children going to school. It would involve Merrimack College being in session, because that's something that you experience, let's say, the majority of the year. I know crashes probably happen all the time.
At that particular spot, there's a lot of merging in and then merging out again.
Right.
And then some containment as you
Yes.
approach that intersection with the North Andover bypass.
Right.
So
That
my
is factored in.
concern as far as regular accidents, you
Yes.
said accidents during the time of your study, which is
Correct.
going to be my next question. During that time of your study, any kind of accident anomalies you tossed. And so I'm just wondering, you had mentioned to one of the other
Yes.
members of the board that if it was a regular occurrence, so then what constitutes a regular occurrence? If I were to ask the police department, what
Right.
would constitute a regular accident at an intersection that may need to be fixed or adjusted, they could give me kind of ballpark. So I'm asking you that question.
So I think I'd first start off with, we did not throw out any data. So there wasn't anything that, there were not any occurrences within the roadway network that we were measuring that would suggest an artificial delay created by a motor vehicle accident or road work, or something like that. Again, what I would say in terms of, even though crashes may happen frequently along the roadway corridor, I think the majority of the time, hopefully, that we're driving, we're not experiencing crashes. We know they happen all the time, but I would say that hopefully they're not happening every single day on the same section of road and causing the same backups all the time. If that is the case, then that's something we would want to point out as we're doing this next phase of the study, which is if there's a predominance of crashes, what can be done to fix those crashes so that they're not a regular occurrence?
So there's no ballpark figure for what would constitute a regular occurrence of crashes or regular occurrence that would need maybe further investigation?
Well, in terms of, if we're looking at crashes in particular to require further investigation, yes, there are metrics that you look at. There are, we call them average crash rates along sections. For specific types of intersections and specific types of roadways, the state actually publishes crash rates. And they're based on the amount of traffic that's on the roadway, and based on a certain volume of traffic, there's an expectation of a certain number of crashes on average that might happen. I know we're talking a lot about averaging, but that's the way it's done. So then if we look at the number of crashes on average, if it exceeds the state's average for either an intersection or roadway, then we would look at it and say, there's something going on here that would need to be addressed.
So if I understand
So
you correctly,
I'm-
you're
I'm-
talking on a road-by-road basis? I'm not finished.
I'm sorry. This is a discussion on the board. I let you come up. This is not a public hearing. There's no right to speak. I think this question's been answered. Do you have anything else that you want to ask?
I was wanting him to just further
No, so we're,
address it.
yeah, no, we're done
My
with
next
that.
question that I wanted to ask was, were any of the studies conducted during COVID, or was it all post-COVID?
Actually, it was the week after school vacation, so that was I think it was last week.
Last week.
Yes, in terms of the data collection, yes.
Oh, so it was just the one time during last week?
Correct, exactly, yes. April is considered, again, average month conditions, and so we do the measurements then. We try to, again, everything that we're capturing
Yeah.
is trying to look at a typical or an average condition, and that's typically the way transportation analyses are conducted. They don't look at the extremes on either end. They try to look at what an average condition typically looks like.
Okay, thank you
Yep,
for
you're welcome.
your explanation.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. We appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome.
And so we'll look forward to getting that additional data and information and maps, and then we'll look at that before you're moving on to kind of the second part of the study?
Correct, with a narrative that I think will be informative as well, so that you can kind of look at the, this is a snapshot, but you'll get some more meat on the bones, essentially.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right. Let's do 1160 and 1116 Great Pond Road, Brooks School. Application for a watershed protection district special permit and site plan review special permit under Chapter 195, Article 4.5, Article 8, Parts 1 through 3, and Article 10, Section 195, 10.7 of the Town of North Andover zoning bylaw. The project proposes removal of 2 existing boathouses to be replaced with a single boathouse, removal and replacement of existing housing and improvements at 1116 Great Pond Road, and removal of a portion of impervious driveway areas at 1116 Great Pond Road. Work is proposed within the general non-discharge and non-disturbance buffer zones. The project is located in the R1 zone. Hello.
Hello.
All right. Gene, why don't you tell us, give us an update of where we are right now, and then we'll go into the new material.
Sure. So the hearing opened only last Tuesday. There's been some supplemental information based on board's input at that meeting. What is displayed here is a conceptual layout plan that addresses some of the Conservation Commission input that the applicants want to review with you. They've also submitted the lighting plan that you requested. Stormwater review has been closed out. Department review comments have been responded to. I've included the lighting plan associated with the south entrance relocation. We don't have proposed mitigation at this point, but they have taken that into consideration, and for, likely at the next meeting, you'll get an update to that.
Okay. Great. Gentlemen, go ahead.
Andrew Leonard, AT Leonard Associates, landscape architect on the project. Anthony Cleaves from Webden Bingham, Division of Haley and Ward. We also have Paul Griffin from Brooks School, and we have Brian Vaughn from Smolak and Vaughn. The plan before you that you see on the screen is a response to some initial comments we had with the Conservation Commission of just a general question, really just initial reactions. We didn't get into an in-depth meeting with them. 2 gut responses they had were, could we put the boathouse outside the 50-foot buffer zone line? And could we remove the gravel proposed down the steeper slope, which would be plan right of the building, in order to just lessen any chance of erosion or anything like that. So we went back and looked at what we could do to meet their requests. What we show here, so you can see the 2 existing boathouses are kind of on the bottom as like wings, highlighted in red. And then you'll see a red dash line right kind of underneath the proposed boathouse that says current boathouse location. So that's the location that we proposed in the original submission. Thank you, Anthony. I don't know if everyone can see your okay. Yes, thank you, Gene. So what we'd be looking to do is slide the boathouse to the east, which is plan right, 10 feet, and it would move it 2 more feet further back from the lake, which would get us outside the 50-foot buffer zone. Still in the same general position, same size, same landscape, pretty much same everything else. We would then propose to reinforce a lawn slope, so emergency vehicles could still get down to the launch, but we wouldn't be promoting significant vehicular activity, and we would not have a gravel surface that could erode down to the lake. So everything around the building would actually be green, other than the accessible walk. Go ahead.
So I've said that to the fire department to have them weigh in on that surface.
Thank you. And we reviewed that with the crew folks to see if that would be any inconvenience for them, and they said no, they could absolutely work with this plan, in particular the way the boats are stored in the proposed boathouse. So we just wanted to run it by the planning board and make sure that the planning board didn't have any objections to the potential shift.
Just while we're on this map, but you can address it later, just so I don't forget, this actually shows, I think, in the gray area where you're putting boats in and out of the water?
That is the existing launch location.
Yes, launch location.
Yes.
It's not a true ramp, it's a launch location.
Yes,
could you just at some point comment, are there any changes to the launch location? Great, thank you.
No.
Location stays the same, it'll just be retopping the crushed stone that's there, just
Okay, thank you.
redressing that up.
Yep, great,
And no change in dimension of it either.
Great.
So,
thank you.
yep.
And I think you're using hand carts?
Yes.
To launch the boat. It's not motorized, they're not trailers, they're carts
Correct.
designed to hand launch,
Correct.
which I just want to thank you for doing that. That's correct, and we like to see that.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, anyone have just other questions, comments? I don't.
It's appropriate to follow up now, but Peter had asked the question at the last meeting, whether the boathouse is being designed to accommodate future electric boats.
Yes, I can give an update on that. Actually, Brooks has been, we didn't actually know, but Brooks has actually been reaching out to multiple motor vendors, electrical motor vendors, because it's their goal as well to get off gas. Right now, the technology has improved, which you had mentioned last time, Peter. But right now, the speed to keep up with the crew boats and the duration that the motors can last is actually not long enough to be safe for like a regatta or their events. The practices, maybe they could rotate, but it's not quite there from a safety standpoint. So the goal is to make sure the building is outfitted to be able to charge motors that will run proper power to the building, so that as soon as we basically can get a motor that is safe to run the regattas without having to basically have the boat come back while the kids are still racing, then the goal would be to start the switch over.
That's great. And in my mind, there's never been a question about compromising the safety. That comes first. So a calculation of speed and duration based on the length of the race or the practice is very appropriate. It's great that you're configuring the boathouse to accommodate electric charging. That's great to hear, and it's great to hear that it's Brooks's goal also to continue to look at this technology to shift when possible. I would just add, not that this is part of the boathouse, although it actually is part of the boathouse because it could impact storage. The type of chase boat is just as important a factor in speed and endurance of the engine as is the engine. So some crew teams use a form of small catamaran boat instead of the Grumman aluminum boats that Brooks uses. And the result is you're pushing a lot less water. It goes faster per horsepower and lasts longer. I can't name off the top of my head the type of crew teams that use that style boat, but it might be something to look at. And I'm not talking about big catamarans like a Hobie 16. They're no wider than the aluminum rowboats that Brooks is using now. But the effect is they have much less displacement, they push less water. So I was going to just offer this as a thought, but the dimension of the boat is a little different than the rowboat. So you might actually also want to take that into account for your storage plan in the boathouse. But I'll leave that with you. It's great to hear what you're doing. Thank you very much for the continued stewardship.
Thank you for the lighting study. I think that's very helpful. And look forward to continuing to hear about the south entrance to see what we can do there just to kind of assuage that situation and make it more manageable for everyone. All right, Gene, so what are the, go ahead, please. May 24th?
May 24th at
6 p.m.
6 p.m.
6 p.m. So the agenda will be posted to that effect. And Peter, again, to follow up on your request in the Cove area of additional plantings, they intend to update the site plan all at once with the other recommendations.
And what does that mean? Are you looking at maybe some additional plantings in that area?
Yeah, so, I don't know, Paul, if you want to come up and speak to that.
Yeah, so I think you were with us, I know Gene was, and I know Amy was, we had done a walk. Andrew and I and some engineers were working on a comprehensive plan to do the entire lake. on our property.
Right.
We'd like to incorporate that into that
I
process.
gotcha. Okay, great. And yes, I was on that walk. That was what,
That
3 or
was
4 years ago?
Yeah, it was a few years ago.
COVID set it back, but we're
Right.
very much into it. It's not like it's 5 years hence.
Yeah.
But that's going to be a multi-year process
Great.
of developing, permitting with you, obviously, but then a 3 to 5 year process of going end to end on the lake.
Great.
Which would probably be a more thorough examination of what should happen in that parcel than what would be part of like this application, if you know what I mean. So
Right.
like in terms
Right.
of like what's the maintenance protocol
Yep.
and what should be planted, and so instead of just putting in some plants as like a good steward, it's actually like what's our invasive controls, what plant should go there, what type of shrubs
Right.
should be there for stabilization.
Super.
And our thought is to include the 1116 cove that you've talked about as
Yeah.
part of the overall
Super.
forward stewardship look.
Super. Do you have any as a goal that, you know, Brooks could really be demonstrating a best practice? I mean, I don't think you're obligated to, but does that motivate you?
Absolutely. I talked to Gene about that. What we'd like to do is we develop this plan, again, working with you, but as we develop the plan, we want to be able to share the plan, right? And
Yeah.
then you can say, look at what they're doing. We're glad to share it and we're glad to
Right.
talk about it.
Great.
Because we're going to learn a lot of stuff in the process of getting there. It's a lot of work to do, but
Yeah.
we're seeing this as, you know, not only beneficial for the lake, for the town, but our own safety, frankly,
Yeah.
because it's a mess down there.
Yeah.
But just getting that done and then sharing it with everybody else.
Super. Great. Thank you. And again, thanks for your stewardship.
Sure.
You own such a large piece of property draining into the drinking water supply. It's very important.
So just a clarification, Gene, we might not include plants in
I
our
understand.
next round submission to make sure that we do the greater look when we look
Yep.
at the future.
Okay.
No, good. No, the boat talk was like, whoosh.
Hey, you're a kayaker.
One time out makes me a kayaker. Excellent.
You haven't done the Eskimo roll yet?
Not yet. Okay, so that's great. And I mean, you guys got through with all the approvals from Stormwater in 2 go-rounds is impressive. So next steps to put it to the June meeting?
June 7th, and I would suggest I can prepare decisions for that.
Perfect.
If you get me updated plans early enough
Yeah,
to
yeah.
reference. So the May site
Yeah.
walk should be
May
informative.
site walk and then,
But I don't think new, so.
okay, May site walk and then, yeah, unless something, you know, drastically appears to one of us, let's have decisions for the next date.
Makes sense.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for all the work. Okay, Master Plan Implementation Committee, do we have John Strauss?
He has not come. I shot him an email, but he didn't respond.
All right, so let's-
The
we'll just-
quarterly report is in the packet.
Okay. So, I don't know if Stan wants to say anything, or if I can just,
Oh, yeah, Stan is here.
I'll just say that, so I've been put onto the implementation committee, and I think the biggest update is that the website has gone live. Yeah, the website has gone live, and the website has basically metrics of what things in the master plan have been met, and kind of little descriptions of those, as well as what things are ongoing and what have yet to be hit. And it's just a worthwhile read and a good way to track kind of in real time how things are progressing from departments and things on the master plan. See, I ask, you say no, and then he shows up.
I know.
Can't help
You
himself.
got me going.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, Stan Lippert, 43 Stonecleve Road. I just wanted to add to your comments, Mr. Goldberg, that the planning staff has done an excellent job in really populating the website with information. And you can go and look on the website to see for the 103 strategies that is in our master plan, what progress has been made on any one of those strategies. So it's interesting to see that in some areas we're making some pretty dramatic progress. In other areas we have more work to do, but I just wanted to compliment the staff on all the work they've done to get that information up on the website so that we all can be looking at it and appreciating where we're heading. And we're going to keep updating that as things change and as progress is made on all those areas. So.
And having worked on and looked at master plans for myself in multiple communities, you don't often get this kind of live, interactive, updated material. Usually it's a master plan, and then 20 years later, hey, what happened to that master plan? We should do a master plan. Hey, we did one before and it sat on a shelf. And so I know this board was really active in the master plan and getting in that master plan implementation committee, and so was the select board and the town, and that's something that we can all kind of give ourselves a little pat on the back, because that's really an impressive feat of planning that not a lot of people follow through on.
Well, and to your point, having served on the committee now for a little while, I'm impressed by how much progress we're making. It's interesting to really be able to look at it in some detail and see that we really are making progress on our master plan. So, like you say, it's not a bookshelf document. It really is a living, breathing document that we're making some good use of. So,
Very good, thanks, Ted. 510, 530 Turnpike Street, Merrimack College. Discussion regarding 510, 530 Turnpike Street. Mr. Doggett.
Thank you. Gino, bring up the slides for me. Jeff Doggett, Merrimack College, and Johnson Street here in North Andover. The purpose of me being here today is just to provide information. Obviously, how 510, 530, I think when this board first heard about it, had a number of questions. I saw that. I wanted to respond to that as best as we possibly can. So I'm going to walk through this and obviously answer questions as we go. So, Gina, if you want to pop in, I just want to start really quickly on just what is 510, 530. The 510 is a two-story building, approximately 20,000 square feet. It's got 8 office suites. Merrimack has, over the past 9 years, leased upwards of 4 of those suites, so about half the building. At one point, almost the entire second floor, and then one of the units on the first floor. 530 Turnpike's a one-story building, call it 14,600 feet roughly. It's been vacant for some period of time. It has been a various number of fitness centers and a bank. I think it was Salem Bank. And just prior to COVID, the institution was in a discussion with the owner at the time about leasing approximately half of that facility for academic use. And then obviously COVID happened and we all know the rest. This gives you just a sense for those people that are more, like myself, more visual about what we see every day. It's a 2-acre lot. The zoning is general use. It's got 126 parking spaces on it. It has 2 existing curb cuts. My understanding is that those curb cuts, there was a conversation between MassDOT and the previous owner about how all that fits together with the Route 114 investment program. I actually don't know where that sat or where it sits in the end, but I think it's fair to say we're much more amenable to making sure that this all comes together, and whether that needs to be 1 curb cut or 2 is something we'll discuss with MassDOT. The 2 buildings, as I had said before, is office space and then a fitness center. Junior, if you go to the next one. So just as I'd said before, Merrimack was either leasing or was in the process of getting ready to lease what would literally have been half of all the space on the property. We were notified in very late 2021 that the owner was looking to sell and wanted to do that incredibly quickly. The risk to us was losing that amount of space and doing so close to the campus. We performed a market appraisal that came back with a price that we ultimately purchased the property for. And just as a note, because it's worth mentioning, there are non-Merrimack tenants still in the building. So our goal is to take an existing engineering department in Palmisano Hall, which is on the back end of 114, and move them into 530 and parts of 510. And those areas are civil, mechanical, and electrical engineering. And I'll just pause there for a moment because I think properly so, without sufficient information, there are lots of questions about what type of engineering, and is this chemical engineering, and what will that mean? And I wanted to make sure this was one of 2 or 3 reasons why I felt it was important to just provide information to this board. And so this was certainly one of them. I don't want anyone to feel that there was something that was moving over that was detrimental without a much longer conversation. And I'll get into each of those uses in a second. The third is this represents about 170 students. So not that every student is always in the same place all at the same time. I'm sure we would love to have our professors believe that 100% of the students will show up all the time, but even if they did, they wouldn't meet the capacity of 530, which is slightly above that. And then there's probably 200 people in total when you add staff and faculty as well. And the next most important thing is this is an interior renovation project that we're looking to do. When word got out there was a demolition permit, I think people naturally just assumed, and I say naturally because I'm not naive to how people perceive quickly about institutions in Merrimack specifically, believe that one of the buildings is coming down. That's not true. This is an interior project, and we're not impacting the bulk or the height or the lot area or any setbacks or any open space. We're not looking to add or take away from any of the parking. We're not doing anything on the building coverage of the land. We're not doing anything that impacts stormwater drainage, right? This is an interior renovation project. Gene, you want to continue? So this is actually what is the first floor of Palmisano Hall. And I only note this because we're converting much of this over, and I just wanted people to get a sense, because the next slide is get some pictures of what's there. This is, in all my time coming to planning meetings, it's rare that you can actually know what is moving and actually have a visualization of it, right? Everything is, I think as Mr. Simons has said many times, there's, right, we're talking about what happens, but we don't actually know for sure until we're there. In this particular case, we know much of what it is because it's just moving. And so there's things like geosystems labs, which in essence is similar to teaching students how to do borings, right, for civil engineering. Mechanic labs, we do fabrication of robots and 3D printing and that nature, faculty offices and some storage. Gene, if you want to go to the next slide. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
It's very helpful to understand this is civil, mechanical, and electrical because it's a big difference from chemicals, so thank you. But in some of the materials labs that I've seen, sometimes they do use fume hoods for materials processing. You'll get to that?
I will get to that.
Thank you.
Yep.
What kind of, are we talking like world taking over robots or just like regular robots?
Well, I'm not really at liberty to say. No, I'm just kidding. No, there's no government contracts for robots at Merrimack College. You keep going, Gene. So this just gives you an indication of what the kind of spaces is that we're talking about. This exists in the facility. And I'm just going to focus on a couple, because some of this is just general classroom. The Fabrication Lab is an example where what we are teaching our students is not simply what the ratios for building a bridge would be, right? What we're talking about is here's raw material, and you're going to come in and build a bridge, right? And then our students compete with other institutions on bridges and concrete canoes and things of that nature, but it's a very hands-on project. So what you're seeing there is the actual Fabrication Lab. And then in terms of the geosystems, there is a single hood. There would be one in the next. And it is actually dealing with potential fluids and systems that come across when you're doing borings and you're checking, and this is not my forte, so bear with me. There are people on this table who probably know much better than I, right? But how are we making sure that the ground is solid when you're going to build on it, right? And what are the things that you're finding in that ground, and what are the systems that you're going to deal with from a geo perspective that affect that, right? I hope I passed that test because that was a lot for me. Yes.
Yeah. So just a quick question. So is it just one fume hood?
Yeah.
Okay. So are you planning to then? I'd imagine just alter the HVAC systems to accommodate the fume hoods. So it'd be like a makeup air unit and an exhaust, I'd imagine.
Yeah. So we've taken out, as part of a demolition process, we removed all the HVAC system because everything in there was built for one or two things, either a bank. So if someone had walked in there 6 weeks ago, they would have literally seen a bank. It had all the teller systems, it had offices and safes, and then on the other side was still a fitness center space. So it still had showers, it still had locker rooms, and all an HVAC system that accommodated all of that. And all of that has to come out to be able to do what you're describing. So there's proper ventilation in that area, both for the hood, but then also just for the rest of the spaces. Go to the next one. So this is the second floor of 510. The ground floor of 510 actually has non-Merrimack tenants in there, and that will remain, at least for some period into the future. But for right now, it's going to remain as continuing non-Merrimack tenants. This is going to be where the faculty offices are, so everything on the right-hand side of this diagram, which would be the back side of the facility, would be offices. I think we're going to have to renovate to add like 3 offices to that space, but otherwise, there's nothing really changing in there. And then on the front side, where it describes as the electrical engineering learning environment, would simply be a classroom space where there would be some basic design work. And just for added, just so that we all were on the same path, I actually added some basic courses that would be that would happen, because I know, again, going back to the question, I don't want to be I don't want to mislead, right? So things like circuit theory, right, and power quality and energy generation would be the classes that might be in that space. Gene, you want to go to the next slide? In 530, the programs collectively will support general classrooms, and there's a reason for that, and I'll get to that in a second, some advising offices, some computer labs, the 3D printer, pretty much everything that you see and the other facility will move over. There'll be larger spaces, but it'll basically be the same. And then again, on the right-hand side are just some of the courses that would be used in that part of the facility. Gene, if you want to go to the next, which would be the floor plate of 530. And so here we're trying to do the same thing. So the front of the building, so 114 would be where Peter is sitting, and the back of the building would be where student fabrication and workspace is. And so that would be a space where fabrication work comes in off the back and then goes to a fabrication lab. There'd be some mechanics materials, and the geosystem would be in the middle. And then the environmental lab, which would be the one I'm describing with the hood, would be the one that is in the upper right-hand corner. Classrooms are just general classrooms, because what we want to be able to do is when students are here, we don't want them having to traverse back and forth between the campus. We'll actually take some of their other classes and bring them over, right? So the faculty is the one that's moving, not the student. And then on the other side is computer lab, office spaces, which is just simply for advisors, and some student workspace off the 3D printer shop. So this facility will only have 5 permanent staff in the building. Otherwise, it'll be students. Gene, if you want to keep going, please. So coming right back to the conversation that we were all just a part of is parking. And so my goal here is to do 2 things. Number one is just to talk about where things have been and where things could be and where I think the comfort level of difference is. And then I'll get to how they get to the space after on the next slide. So right as of before our acquisition, 510 is a 20,000 square foot office building. It required under the code 60 spaces on the site. The 530 was part of a fitness center, and that had a particular requirement of spaces, 36.7, I'll just call that 37. And then the bank had its own number of spaces, which was 20, I'll call it 22, 23. That creates probably the need for what they ended up with, which was 126 parking spaces. I would note that the bank also had a drive-through, which created its own set of ins and outs. I assume that's what generated probably the need for the second curb cut. On the other side, which is on the right-hand side, right, 510, what would be existing would be the office space and the number of spaces that creates. Under the college and university use, I think, Gene, if you could just move up just slightly. I'm sorry, the other way. Yep, thank you, right. Under the ITE and the parking generation manual, under college and use, it would be a lower number of spaces. I presume that's because out of residential use, it'd be people that are walking over. I just look at it as whether, regardless of which way we look at it, whether it's institutional use or just plain office use, right? The difference is between 46 or 46 spaces and the 60 spaces. And then 530 Turnpike Street, using that as a college use, only generates the need for 17.5 spaces. But even if it didn't and it generated the same number of spaces, right, we're still meeting that based on the 126 spaces that are on the site. So I only did this just to show, because I know sometimes there's a lot of questions about, okay, well, we're describing a different use, but what happens if that use doesn't end up working out exactly? And I just say, okay, while we could go down this road, if we stick back to where we are, we're still in a place where somewhere between 126 and the 64 spaces that were to be required is probably where we'll all land. And so no need to in my mind, to get into the gory details of exactly whether it should be 1.2 or whether that's the right engineering manual or not in terms of the parking.
So your point, but I think you said earlier it was a demolition was inside, so the parking
Correct.
spaces are not changing?
Correct. There's
Okay.
we are not seeking any additional parking spaces. We're not taking away any of the parking spaces. This is just internal.
Okay, thank you.
And then the last slide is how we're going to get people there, because I think, in fairness, that's a good question as well. So we're doing the following to mitigate the number of cars that actually go on the site and the number of cars driving to the site and the number of people that are walking to and from the site. Number one is we control the parking, right? And we'll control it through a decal parking system. The second is that we'll limit the number of the parking passes allowed to commuter students and those students that approved accommodations, right? So if you're a residential student and you have a handicap and you need to have a car, okay, obviously you're going to get an assistance in that if necessary. Most students, however, will end up parking on the campus because there will be some number of students who will park there, come over, take classes, and then walk back. We will expand our existing shuttle service to connect students to the site because our goal is to avoid as many people traveling back and forth in vehicles. And let's be honest, in colder weather, they're not going to want to walk anyways, and I want to avoid that being an excuse to use cars. Of the 170 current students that are in the engineering program, assuming that relatively remains flat, or even if it grows slightly, 114 of those are projected to be in housing next year. And we're already working to steer most of those into the units that we lease at Royal Crest, so that they're not even coming across the street as often as they would otherwise. Again, just reducing the number of people coming across on the crosswalk as best as we possibly can. And then the final piece is we added the general use classrooms, so that instead of having 30 kids leave a class to come onto the campus to take an English class, the faculty will come over there, so they're more stationed for the day. And we believe by doing all of those, regardless of whether we need more or less parking spaces, we feel like that's a good way to mitigate the number of ins and outs off the project. It's certainly going to be less than what would have been a drive-through, but in fairness, it hasn't been a drive-through since before COVID, so I'm not really sure it'd be a fair representation to say, it was like that a month ago, right? And a month ago, there wasn't really anyone going on there, and right now, if you were to drive onto the site, there's barely 10 people parking there, right? And then the last point is, as I said earlier, we'll work with MassDOT to make sure that they're getting what they need in terms of the overall project on the curb cuts, because I honestly don't remember where that ended up. I just think it was an open-ended item with the previous owner. And I think that's it. I'm happy to answer questions, but I just felt in light of this board and some of the questions that came up, it made sense to come in and just explain where things were. So you weren't left trying to answer questions without the data. So,
Thank you. Questions, comments? Kelly, Alyssa?
I just have a question. With the basically excess parking spaces, will any of those spaces be used for like assigned parking for resident students?
well, that's a very good question. No, it will not.
So, it would be like, I assume people wouldn't be parking there at night, right?
Right.
It's just for classroom use during classroom hours.
It's actually a great question. But no, it doesn't become surplus parking for us to do overnight parking.
Are labs, I'm not an engineering student, are labs used, like, do people do, if you're working on a big project, can people be there, like, at the current labs, like 10 o'clock at night or something like that? Is it hours?
What ends up happening, and there are several types of student like this, right? Your communication students, your engineering students, they are much more likely to work together as groups, right? And they may do something late at night, they may do something early in the morning. That's different than, say, a nursing class where they're doing their stuff during the day. They're not engaged as much as at the night.
Okay. Sound good.
Sure. Is there a capstone-like requirement for the engineering department? Like, is there like a final project for, engineering students that are about to graduate? I'm just curious because that plays obviously, and if they're doing labs, they're going to be doing labs as a function of that capstone
Yep.
exercise.
I'm sure that there are at some level within some of the classes, but I don't think it's a universal thing for everybody. And I think there are some classes that, I just met with one the other day that's much more interested in, I wouldn't sure I'd call it a capstone, but they're much more interested in understanding how the colleges will start making decisions as it relates to energy efficiencies and converting their classwork into that activity. So I think there's more partnership opportunities. I know that's not exactly what you were asking, but I could see those type of scenarios. But there is not a standard, here's the capstone that every engineering student goes through. And so there's a mad rush in the final 3 weeks where there's just like, we're trying to kill it just to get it done.
Got it. Thanks.
Yep.
Anyone else, board members? Good, thank you, Jeff. I think we appreciate you coming in, giving us that information, and look forward to the next steps for any permitting.
Great, thank you.
Great, thank you. 660 Great Pond Road, Rolling Ridge, request for waiver of watershed special permit according to Article 4, Section 195, 4.24 of the zoning bylaw. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Fran Fink, and I'm a member of the Giving Garden Steering Committee.
Okay.
And we rent space at the Rolling Ridge Conference Center and have established a big garden there. And I'm here tonight because we'd like to put a greenhouse up. It'd be about 8 feet by 20 feet. It's made with a metal frame and plastic panels that slide in, be anchored to the ground with bolts that auger in to the ground, so there wouldn't be a lot of digging and pouring of concrete and that kind of thing. And it has rain gutters. We'd like to collect the water that comes off of those in rain barrels and use that to water our crops. And that way the water would stay in the vicinity of the greenhouse and benefit our crops and ultimately work its way down the hill toward the lake if it wasn't taken up by the plants. And I've provided a description of the project and some site plans to kind of show you. We have 3 possible locations to put it. And we're constrained by wetlands, a conservation restriction, and then the watershed district requirements. So we've tried to site it where it will have the least impact on all of those things.
Gene, do we have any input from conservation?
Yes, so they're proposing to locate it outside of the 100-foot conservation zone. They
Yep.
provide an annual report to conservation on this garden and soil management, and so they just did that at their last meeting.
And it was approved.
And it was approved, so likely they will not have jurisdiction over this, based
Okay.
on the proposed locations. It's located in the non-discharge, all 3 of the proposals, with no excavation, helical piers to anchor it. It's a relatively flat surface today.
Where on the property we're talking about? I'm still.
So this is the main drive access. This is the house that sits up front on Great Pond Road, the main drive access. And so to the left of the driveway is the garden today, and the locations identified as A, B, and C. Keep it outside of the conservation restriction and within the non-discharge, not the non-disturbance zone.
So we don't have a drawing of what the footprint would look like for A, B, or C, but is the center of the structure at the location of A, B, and C? I don't understand how we tell what the 3 locations are.
I don't know if you can see the scale on the site plan, but 8 feet by 20 feet is very tiny. So it would be smaller, I think, than any of the circles that you see there with the letters A, B, and C in them.
Meaning the whole footprint of the
The whole footprint of the greenhouse
would sit
be-
within the circle
right,
lettered.
right.
Can you go back to the greenhouse drawing or the dimensions? It's a picture of that.
This is moving really slow, so hold on. This shows the conservation.
Where, yeah, can you show the delineation, the CR? I just,
If you, all of the properties is in the restricted area except for that large rectangle that's around the director's house, which is right at Great Pond Road. And then there's another unrestricted envelope around the largest state house at the north end of the property.
So you see the spot to the bottom left, John, is the area for future three-car parking, which has been
yeah, I
installed.
guess, so is the thing located on the lot that's part of the house in the front?
It's all one lot. The rectangle around that house is the unrestricted area, the area outside of the conservation.
Yeah,
district.
that's what it is. So, yeah, so it's that rectangle and it's inside of that rectangle. I'm just,
Yes, so it's proposed within that
Right.
non-conservation
yeah.
restriction area.
So using that drawing, with your cursor, Jean, can you show us where this would be located?
If you scroll down to there's another
Well,
version where I've drawn the location of our fence and keep going.
So Eitan, do you want to
Yeah.
stop while we're here?
So, yeah, what's the dimensions of the greenhouse?
So it's 8 feet across and 20 feet long. It's
Jean, what
removable.
page? Oh, there you go. Thank you.
So it can be broken down if it's no longer needed.
Yeah, it all bolts together, you slide the panels in, and then you unbolt it at the end. And
Go down to the bottom.
So
So
Peter,
on here, there's
the
a
rectangle
smaller
is shown.
rectangle sort
Can
of
you
at the
zoom
north
that,
end
Yep.
of the
Jean?
unrestricted rectangle, and that's approximately the fence location. I did a
Okay.
lot of measurements out there. I used to work for planning boards and conservation commissions in my former life, so I know my way around site plans. So I just used the scale and the measurements I took to locate
Can you zoom that again?
corners of the fence.
Thanks.
So this rectangle is drawn, I'll call it to the north of the rectangle for the non-conservation area?
Yeah, that's the fence line. Part of the garden extends into the restricted area.
Okay.
Most of the garden is in the unrestricted area.
Okay. So that's the garden itself,
Yeah,
not
that's
the
the-
proposed
the-
greenhouse?
The fence around it. Yeah, the greenhouse is a little bit to the west of the gate and the fence. And then I think the next site plan
And
also
what-
has.
What determines whether it's A, B, or C?
I think our preference would be to put it at A or B. B would take some of our growing space inside the fence and turn it into the greenhouse. So we would lose some growing area. We have a wash station near there, we have a shed near there, we have a gate. So it would fit in well with our existing structures in that area. And a C would be less preferred. It's a longer distance away from our kind of work area there, and it's uphill. It's also a little, A and B are flat. C has a very small slope to it, which we have to address, but, so A or B I think would be the preference.
And is there any impact from our perspective on A versus B, Jean?
Not as long as it's within that rectangle.
And you could put it where A is, so A is your preferred?
I don't think the committee has actually voted.
Oh.
We wanted to see what would meet your approval.
I think they're asking whether
and-
they can do A or B.
Yeah,
So
yeah, we're more
if you
saying-
did A, will it stay inside that rectangle?
It has to.
It would stay in the unrestricted zone.
Okay.
It would be outside of the rectangle, which is our fence.
And it's placed on a metal frame, so they're just going to put like protective,
Yep, I
Yeah,
got that.
Put
that
some,
was, yeah, one of my questions is what kind of grading does it have to be?
there shouldn't be any grading. There should be
Yeah,
no change to
it's
topography.
flat.
It's a flat area and those helical, they just get augured
But
in.
what's the floor? Does it stay?
We want to put down geotextile cloth of some sort and then
Oh.
put pea stone on top of that.
And how tall?
How tall's the structure?
tall enough to stand up in, I don't know.
Well, it should say it on the picture.
It may have the dimension on
Is
that
that it? Yeah. 93.
sketch of it.
Just keep going up.
93 inches, it looks like,
Yeah.
to the peak of the roof. How many feet is that?
What is it?
93 inches.
No, that's not very.
The top
No.
left corner, John. But it's just the peak. I mean, the roof is
Yeah.
angled.
Door, let's see, the eave height is.
And you said you were going to capture the runoff?
It comes with gutters. And so if we can direct the flow from the gutters into rain barrels, then we can use that to water the garden. Otherwise, we could put a grass swale, or we could put a stone trench, or something of that
And the
nature.
request is for a waiver, so we could condition the rain barrels. Like, you could condition that that's how we want to infiltrate, using that to irrigate.
Yeah, I mean, I don't
Yeah.
know what the right answer is,
Yeah.
but you want to make sure it's taken care of in some shape.
Yeah, I
or
mean,
form.
that's the conversation with the counter. So initially, there was no thought of that, and they were just going to be directed straight from the gutter to the ground. So we talked about potentially a stone trench around the whole perimeter and not use gutters, and let it go into a 2-foot wide by 2-foot deep stone trench, or they'd have to construct a swale, so that gets a little bit more involved, or rain barrels. So,
So we could condition that it be either one of those?
yep.
Okay.
And I could have John Borghese review it to make sure he's satisfied as well.
Does that satisfy everyone?
Yep.
Okay. Can we get a motion to approve the waiver of a watershed special permit with the condition that either, was it the rain barrels, or was it trench,
Stone trench.
or a stone trench be part of the project? Can we get a motion?
So moved.
Motion made and seconded. All in favor? Alyssa?
Yes.
Kelly?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Peter?
Aye.
I vote yes. It's approved with the
Okay,
condition.
and do you have any preference for the location?
As long as it stays inside that perimeter.
Okay.
And so that's going to take a little bit, to write up a decision that will get recorded at the Registry of Deeds. So you can't act on it tomorrow, but
Yeah, no,
within a
we
week
still
or
got to
so.
chase a building
Okay.
permit, so
Okay.
that's, yeah.
Okay, thank you
All
very
right,
much.
Thank you very much.
Stormwater Management and Erosion Control Regulations Update, Chapter 165, the General Bylaw, Tie and Bond. Hello, it's fine.
Yes. I just have to bring that up. All right, so this is Emily from Tie and Bond, and I have very little to say, so Emily will give you the presentation.
Okay.
Okay, and then you've got the presentation, right?
Yes.
And John is on the phone in case we need him to answer anything.
Just give me 1 second. Sorry, I've had to go back and forth. 1 second. Okay,
Okay, we'll just go to the agenda slide. Whoop.
I said okay. There we go.
That's how I feel running every Zoom meeting. Yeah, you can go to the next slide. We'll skip right down. Yeah, so I'm Emily Sherbo. I'm a senior project manager at Time Bond. I've been working on North Andover's stormwater program for, I was trying to think of how many years. I think at least since 2014, maybe earlier than that. But anyways, so for the board and the public, I wanted to just quickly review EPA's stormwater program requirements and the town's progress. There's an annual requirement to give the public a chance to participate and provide input. Then we'll look at the new requirements for local oversight of development and redevelopment and the draft regulations to address those new requirements. So you can go to the next slide. So I think you've heard this from me probably before, but the town has been working under EPA's small MS4 stormwater permit since 2003. MS4, again, is just EPA's way of talking about the municipal drainage system. It's the municipal separate storm sewer system. And North Andover is North Andover's regulated area, you can see in the red, is almost the entire town. It's the urbanized area. There is a section, mostly in the Ipswich watershed, to the southeast that is not considered regulated. But with the bylaw and regulations we're talking about tonight, it's going to extend to the entire community because it would be too difficult to try to implement that. So anyways, the goals of EPA's program it's about water quality. It's partly about drainage system maintenance, but mostly it's about reducing stormwater pollution that's been shown to be a major contributor to lakes, rivers, and streams not meeting Clean Water Act goals. So North Andover is one of over 250 Massachusetts cities and towns that fall under this permit program. The permit has over 200 separate requirements. It's fairly onerous and comprehensive. I'll go to that.
Andover meet the Clean Water Act goals?
So we'll get to that a little
Okay.
bit. Yeah. North Andover is doing what they need to do under the permit, so they are sort of presumptively in compliance, even though water bodies may still be impaired. Okay, so North Andover's stormwater management program accomplishments to date include back in 2018, 2019, when the new permit came out. We developed a notice of intent application and a stormwater management plan. At the end of the presentation, there's a link to where you can see some of this information. Every year, there's public education and outreach. The IDDE program is a big piece of this program. We're not really talking about that tonight, but that's, the town has gone and visited almost all of their nearly 500 stormwater outfalls, and now we're moving up into the system and doing investigations for sources of pollution. So it's a huge effort.
Does this plan identify all of the stormwater outfalls that drain into the lake? And is there a map of that?
Yes.
And is there a hard copy version of this report?
The stormwater management plan?
The one you're briefing us on now?
I'm briefing you on draft updates to the regulations, so you can have that in hard copy, right?
Is there a hard copy of the thing that would show all of the locations of the drains into the lake?
Yeah, so John Bergese could print a copy of that map anytime, or I can send a PDF. I think there's probably a map posted online, but the PDF could probably use to be updated. That's like constantly in progress being updated. But I think the work around the lake has been done earlier.
Can we get a copy of that, Jean?
Yeah, I'll write that down. Yeah.
The location of all of the outfalls that you described that flow into the lake?
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. To Lake C specifically.
Sorry, John.
No, that's okay. That's a great question. Anyways, tonight we're talking about the minimum control measure related to construction site runoff control and post-construction stormwater management. So that is the stormwater management and erosion control bylaw that's been in place for some time now, and the regulations. Other pieces of the program, the town has developed a town-wide good housekeeping program that addresses municipal operations and pollution prevention, and there is a stormwater pollution prevention plan for the DPW facility itself. And this program requires annual reports to EPA and DEP every year, and all of those reports are also publicly available.
And you mentioned annual education. Can you go down at the top? A public education annually. Can you describe what is being done for that here?
Sure, yep, and so that's a combination of web content and various, brochures and other material, and even, some social media related to, any kind of stormwater education. There's 4 target audiences. I'm not gonna probably say them all right, but there's a residential audience, commercial, institutional, and developers.
That's good to hear. I don't recall seeing any of that, and I am one of the people who looks for that.
Okay, I can get you those copies too. Conservation sends them out periodically to schools and things like
thank
that.
you.
And our watershed mailers would all count for education.
Okay.
Okay, so we just recently sent 3 different types of those.
Okay,
And
thank you.
we've also put an article in the last water bill or
I
tax
saw
bill.
that, yeah, thanks.
Okay, so
Yeah,
all
it is-
those are,
It's snuck into a lot of different things that people are already getting.
John,
Okay.
ATOM needs to, enforce my time limit here.
do you want me to
Too tired.
assemble a package of that type of information? We provide it annually to these guys who provide the state with our updates.
I would love to see
Okay.
it.
Okay.
Okay, John, I know I'm the only one. All right. It's gonna smack me.
Okay, we can go to the next slide when you're ready, Jean. Okay, so when it comes to local oversight of development and redevelopment, the MS4 permit requires these things. So implementing a program to reduce pollutants in stormwater runoff from construction sites of 1 acre or greater. So you're already doing that with the bylaw you have. There are now additional criteria for stormwater discharges to impaired waters or waters subject to a TMDL. So a TMDL is you can do an extensive study to come up with basically a pollution diet for any water body. Shawsheen River and its tributaries have a bacteria TMDL, and Merrimack has a phosphorus impairment. So, anytime a receiving water has one of these, an impairment really is saying that you're not meeting Clean Water Act goals.
Is there a TMDL for the lake?
No.
And the reason is?
I don't know. It's not even on the impairment list.
So it's only a TMDL if something's impaired?
Yeah, so it has to be impaired. Being impaired means that DEP has to have enough data, first of all, to say that there's an issue, and then they need to come up with what's the pollutant of concern.
So is it because the lake is not impaired? Or
Yeah,
is
the
there
lake is
another-
not considered impaired.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
That's good news.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it is a progression. You go from being impaired. Impaired means you need to have a TMDL study done, and then you eventually have a TMDL. Okay, where am I? So we also need to address post-construction stormwater treatment through the bylaw and regulations. And then there's enhanced record-keeping requirements now and annual reporting related specifically to your permitting and enforcement for this program. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So really quickly, the 2011 Stormwater Management and Erosion Control Bylaw was intended to meet EPA's requirements, but those were the 2003 requirements. So this partially gets you to where EPA wants you to be now with the bylaw you have in place in the land disturbance permit. So we can go next. And since 2011, the Planning Board has been the permit granting authority for the land disturbance permit, and we are not recommending any changes to that. So you can keep going. I'll try to go fast. One complicating factor with this is that the Massachusetts Stormwater Handbook is being revised. That's been in the works for some time now. Most communities are pointing to the Mass Stormwater Handbook for their design standards submittal requirements. The current 2008 handbook is now less stringent than what's in the 2016 MS4 permit. So this is the pickle we're in. We need to go to your regulations, bring them up to the MS4 standard, then the handbook is going to be updated, and what we're hoping is that you won't have to do another update, and if you do, it should be minimal. But EPA is not letting people wait for the handbook to be updated. So we can go to the next slide. So the new MS4 permit specifies the following in general need to be in your regulations. So submission of your as-built drawings following completion of construction within 2 years or less. Submission of an O&M plan for stormwater BMPs, which you already had, but we've beefed it up a little. Management of construction site waste, specifically inspection and enforcement of sites before, during, and after construction. And one thing that's not on the slide is there are enhanced water quality design criteria for development and redevelopment projects. Okay. EPA is also specifying that green infrastructure and LID have to be implemented to the maximum extent feasible. They're very specific about that. So it's not just green infrastructure, so typical, rain gardens, tree box filters. They really are talking about more of low-impact development techniques like preservation and recreation of natural landscape features, minimization of impervious area, functional and appealing site drainage, and then treating stormwater as a resource. So what we just heard about is using the water from the roof to water the garden is exactly what EPA wants to see.
Good job, team.
I mean, like some of the stuff we've been doing for 30 years.
Yeah.
I mean,
So,
Exactly.
so I guess my next question was going to be, so do we need I assume you're coming to, do we need to update our bylaw?
Yeah, so that's the very next
All right.
slide. I've got two left. We do
Okay.
need to, not the, well, so not the bylaw necessarily, just the regulations. So
Okay.
we've made revisions to the regulations. The proposed updates should meet EPA's requirements and are anticipating what's going to be in the Mass Handbook. Again, kind of a black box there. But we've streamlined some of the language to be clear and consistent with the bylaw and the general permit using Northern Middlesex Stormwater Collaborative developed model regulations. So we took some of that language that's going to be pretty consistent throughout the state. We've updated the consultant review procedures for consistency with 53G because that language predates the Municipal Modernization Act, so there's some updates there. We've had significant updates to these following sections, some submittal requirements, performance standards, and I did want to make sure you knew we did look at the Lake Kachikowick watershed plan and tried to incorporate some of those recommendations. There's enhanced design criteria, more on the O&M, and more on inspection procedures to meet what EPA is looking for. And we've clarified the timeline to submit reports and as-built drawings so the town can manage those facilities and do the record keeping. So in terms of next steps, we're just asking you at this point to review this and comment on it. Send any of your comments and concerns and questions to us. We're hoping to come back for a public hearing on June 21st to adopt this. We are still working with planning and engineering on, fine tuning some of the details. I think we may have taken out some of the fine print details that we may end up putting back in as a checklist or something like that. I don't want to lose any of the things you thought were good. I want to make sure we preserve that.
The link to the agenda is the report itself.
Okay, great. It's the report itself.
Yep, so we included in your packet too was
It looks
some
like that, Peter.
small revisions to the fees, because if we're asking property owners in perpetuity to do the O&M and document it, we're asking for them to submit it proactively to the planning board to say, we're doing our annual maintenance and we think there should be a filing fee with that because you'll need to process that. So you'll see that in the fee schedule.
So in
the fee
reviewing
schedule-
this, how do we tell where there are updates? I don't see any track line changes here, or is the whole thing new? This?
Do they have both versions?
No, I only gave the clean version.
Okay.
Is there a track change version?
Sure,
Is there any chance I could see that
Sure.
version? Thank you.
sure.
And I'll get back to you.
Okay.
Let me write that down too.
So the fee schedule, if we add a $50 maintenance fee for getting this report, that would have to go to the select board to be added to our permit fee schedule.
Is that a
So
one-time thing, or is that an annual thing?
It would be annual.
The fee would be an
Yeah.
annual fee.
It,
Yeah, I'm not sure I like that. I mean, I like that, obviously, our staff has time to work on that, and we have a fee, but I don't know, sometimes when you have an annual fee, I feel like it discourages actual people doing what they're supposed to do.
It's true, yeah.
honestly,
yeah.
it's going to be an administrative challenge, but that's specific only to a land disturbance permit, right? Even though our site plan review points to all these same requirements, we do very few land disturbance permits
Yeah.
because almost everything triggers site plan review ahead of that.
And so if you think there'd be like a dual track, we could take the fee out. It's up to you.
Yep.
It's entirely up to you. Like if you think it would be inconsistently applied, maybe we take out the fee.
Yeah, I'm okay with taking out the fee. but-
Take out the fee. Jean, will you just go to the last slide so it's up on the screen? Because this is just important for the public to know that they can go to the town's website to see a lot of the things that we talked about tonight, the reports and documentation and education. So yeah, I'm here for any specific questions you have.
I have a question. Are there any special stormwater management plans or practices for stormwater draining into surface water supplies?
Yes. So there's not in the permit. It's a little more open-ended than that. They just say you need to address it. It's not prescriptive, but we did look through the watershed management plan. One of the the main recommendations they had was to change the permit applicability. So that would be the bylaw. If that was something the board was interested in doing, we couldn't do that through the regulations.
It means
So-
town meeting approval for a town bylaw.
Yeah.
So that's-
They recommended just, look, right now it's at the acre disturbance threshold, so they're saying, move it down to a smaller land
They
disturbance.
said to consider moving it
Consider
down.
it, yes,
So
consider moving it.
Our land disturbance trigger is an acre or more. If it doesn't go to conservation for other reasons and doesn't trigger site plan review and doesn't trigger any other permitting. So
And
that's why
is-
you have so few land disturbance permits, because some other metric is triggering review by a commission or a board.
And this is just within the watershed area, or is this
So this is
anywhere?
Anywhere.
Okay.
Yes,
so-
this is the whole town.
So
And
but my question to you was, is there anything that would distinguish stormwater management plans within the watershed that drains into a surface water supply as opposed to the rest of the town?
so we did add in a couple more recommendations in that watershed plan about referring to the Mass Soil and Erosion Sediment Control Guidelines. We applied that everywhere, though, not just in the Lake Chickawick watershed. So we went even beyond that. So they wanted that for the watershed. We're saying that's a best practice everywhere.
Who wanted it for the watershed?
The Weston and Sampson
Okay,
watershed plan.
right.
They also recommended alternative de-icing practices, so we worked some of that language into the O&M plan.
And that's the thing I'm gonna review?
You're going to review the red line. I'm going to suggest the red line's going to be overwhelming because the vast majority of our regulations repeat everything that's in the bylaw. So it's like incredibly redundant. So there's a lot of strike-throughs that are just
Okay, but
simplifying the
what
language.
she's talking about now, that's also in the thing I'm gonna
So-
review, or is that something different?
The one that Cassandra sent you is not a full red line from the beginning. It's more of an annotated version that I think might be beneficial. It's got some of those
Okay.
comment
Whatever
bubbles.
you want.
I'll look at
right?
that one.
Yeah,
That
it's
one?
just,
Okay.
yeah, so it's not, it is overwhelming to look at all the red lines,
Okay.
but this is,
Great.
points out, like, added per recommendation in the Lake Sea watershed
Great.
plan, so you'll
Okay.
see those little bubbles. So there's a couple things under the O&M plan, another reference to the earth removal, part of zoning that has some specific requirements within the watershed. So we tried to close the loop within the watershed. What else do we put in here? So yeah, it's sort of sprinkled throughout.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Fantastic, thank you. Thank you for sticking with us.
Okay, so that will come back late June for hopefully an adoption.
Okay.
Regulation update.
Planning board report. Which items do we need to discuss tonight, Jean?
Okay, so the two articles that, the planning board report's gone to print. Two articles say to be made at town meeting. Those are Article 7 related to 400 Great Pond Road and Article 8 related to the donation of a parcel of land on Academy Road. In your packet is a memo submitted by the town manager, as well as one resident comment.
All right, so let's see, whichever one you want to pull up.
So do you want me to pull up the town manager memo?
Yes, please.
Jean, is that linked to from the agenda? I know you sent it, I think.
I'm sorry?
Is that linked to from the memo from the town manager? Is that linked to from the agenda? I'm just trying to find
Yes,
it.
it should. It is.
I saw it there.
So the file name is 220502, ART period 7 and ART period 8, town manager memo PDF.
All right, should I read this? Might as well, right?
Is it up? Oh, yeah.
It's pretty long, isn't it?
It's 3 pages.
You want to read the whole thing?
Uh,
No.
Why don't we all read it on our own?
I mean, I skimmed through it, but
So the thing that caught my eye is later on, in an earlier memo from the town manager, I think it was a memo, but it was in writing. One of the drivers to acquire 400 Great Pond Road was so that the town could raise the level of the lake by a foot. This memo says they're not gonna raise the lake. Can you find that wording in here, Gene?
Okay, hold on, let me just read through the one. Currently structure located on the property.
No, that's just
I know,
the recommendation.
I just want to see this. Currently
I'm sorry.
If these structures were legal and or removed, the potential exists that the lake level could be raised an additional.
People get a little closer to the mics. I'm sorry. It's getting
Okay,
hard to hear.
I'm just reading the bottom there to myself. Okay, thank you. Okay, go ahead. You can go to the next page.
That's it.
So this is different wording now in the top paragraph. It's saying, we're just gonna let it rise naturally. It's not gonna increase it by a foot.
Well, so let me just say, I went to the select board meeting, and who was there? Was Jim? Jim was there?
Jim Stanford,
Yeah,
the
Jim
DPW
Stanford was
director.
there, and he spoke at length about this. And so what he said was that it's not that they would just add water to the lake and it would go up. They would stop draining it specifically to make it so that this basement area didn't flood, which could lead to it going up to that foot level that we talked about, but they just let it go naturally, and they wouldn't be, so it's sort of in the inverse, they wouldn't be opening the hatch to take out water when the water level increased, which is what they did now.
And I listened to Jim talk on the select board meeting, and he hit the nail, like, and I didn't realize that until in what, kind of what the trigger point was on raising and lowering the lake. But his whole argument was that as it naturally elevates, that if the homeowner complained, they would have to essentially waste all the water through the gate at Stevens Pond, right? And so I guess the argument there is that, you know, it's not that they're raising the lake, but more so is that, you know, if it naturally rises, that we're not draining the lake as a function of that.
I'm just pointing out that this is not what we heard
This
at
is
the joint
completely
meeting.
different, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
What we heard, the raising at 1 foot didn't come from me. We heard that from the town,
Yeah.
that was the plan. And what you're telling me is that Jim Stanford clarified that is not the plan.
Well, I
mean,
guess the logic of this thing is, well, why are we doing this? There's all sorts of statements that sort of allegedly deal with conservation and so forth. The thing you have to realize in this property is fully protected. You can't build within 250 feet of the lake, and there's a conservation restriction on the property. So there's no ability to put any other thing there. The land is protected, okay? So the question becomes, if the land is protected, why are we spending $1.7 million? What's the logic of the land is already, nothing else will be built there. That's why the appraisal is so low from our appraiser, because he said nothing else could be built there. It's pretty obvious. So why are we doing this?
So what he said was, I guess what Jim said at the hearing was that it would allow the town to allow the lake to rise and fall to its natural levels without having to spend the time, effort, water, energy of draining it every time there's a complaint. I think that was.
But so what are we going to do? What they should say is, we're buying this property, we're going to tear the house down, and even though it's a fairly significant historical structure, to enable us to rise and lower the lake. What I object to in this thing is that it's 3/4 of it is, we're preserving watershed property. We're not preserving, it's already protected.
Can you go back to the first
And
page,
that's a
buddy?
very expensive way to do something that we don't even know what the implication is going to be.
And I think just to add a little bit on Jim's argument is that we can't control what the homeowner's storing in the basement. So you can imagine that there'd be, like, in the instance where the basement actually floods, there could be leachables, right, that can go back into the lake. And I think there's reference to now an oil tank that's down there too.
Well, yeah, but that's the point, is new stuff comes out every time. You can deal with that anyway. That's a public hazard, a public nuisance. You can make that as a condition of, you know, an occupancy permit in that house. I mean, there's a bunch of other things you can do to deal with this. But to spend $1.7 million, and plus, what happens if I think it's subject to eminent domain. What happens if we propose 1.7 and the number is much higher because he gets another appraisal. We end up in a messy situation. It's just,
Well, that's only if we do it by eminent domain. I mean, I think this was an agreement.
well, it's not an agreement. There's no agreement. That's
See, this is part of what John's getting at here. There's all sorts of references to, this is a great idea because we're acquiring land, sensitive water to protect the lake. And John's point is, that property, let's forget about the structure. The property's already protected. So why is this being sold in part as we're buying additional land to protect? Look, protecting lakeshore land is a great idea. We should do that. But I think John's point is, that's already done. We don't need to spend $1.7 million to protect that land. It's already protected. So why is that one of the reasons?
Yeah.
And frankly, it raises doubt in how solid the plan is if the people proposing it don't even know the land's already protected, right?
yeah.
I mean, I think you make an argument that certainly the land's protected, but again, I'll go back to the point that I think Jim made, is that you can't control what a homeowner does in that basement with respect to leachables that can leach into the lake. And if our,
Sure you can.
how?
Sure you can.
I don't agree with that.
No. If you have a nuisance or a hazard, you,
After the fact, though.
After the fact.
well,
when it's
no,
cleanup,
but
right?
I mean, if there's oil or anything like that, you can deal with that now. I mean, you know, I don't buy that.
I mean, I'd suggest going back and
I mean, maybe the town does, and Jim doesn't know how to do that, but I question it as well. If that's imperiling the public drinking water supply, who says we can't prevent a homeowner from having a potential oil spill into, because the oil tank is mentioned here. Who says we can't? I mean, look, maybe we can't, but I really question the conclusion that there's no way we can control what's going on in a basement that sits within the lake. Really? Says who?
I mean, I would suggest going back. I thought it was informative to watch the select board meetings.
Yeah.
So I'd recommend
Yeah, I will.
checking that
Yeah,
out.
thank you, and I appreciate you mentioning that, yeah.
And so, so I think that's at least the information, and we can take a vote on it at town meeting. I do think there's benefit to buying when we can. Most lakefront property, just frankly in general, but
Well,
there
it
matters
is,
the
but
cost.
the point, that's the point I'm making is I'm acutely aware of that, having, you know, been involved in virtually every one of these transactions for the last 30 years, is we don't have an infinite amount of money. And what I don't want to do is spend 1.7 million of the money that we use to buy open space on this, that's already protected, when we could use it to buy something else that may come up at a time, and we don't have the
To your
money.
point, Eitan, I mean, you know, I'm an advocate of protecting the lake and the watershed. But if that parcel is already protected, help me understand the benefit of buying it.
Well, it's protected in, I'd say there are, if it's protected by paper, sometimes there's a benefit to actually being the owner and actually having physical control of actual physical protection, more than just we have the right to enforce protection, you know? You can do more as an owner than you can enforcing your rights on somebody else sometimes, you know? That if you actually have control of it, you can avoid problems at times, rather than trying to remedy problems once they've already occurred, right? So like, we've had situations where people have cut down trees, like on private property, on property and stuff like
That was
that.
not protected.
No, but I'm just saying, if,
I mean, I agree with that, but that's not what this property is. This property is different.
no, well, but it's got a conservation restriction, it's got other restrictions that the owner can't do certain things. That doesn't necessarily mean that the owner, I don't know this owner at all, but I'm just saying, people don't always follow the rules, right? So
Well,
if,
the conservation restrictions held by Greenbelt, and they watch, I've talked to them a number of
okay,
times
I'm
about
just
this,
saying,
and they-
I don't
mean,
know
it-
that much about this particular property, I'll be honest, I don't know. But I'm just saying, in general, there is a benefit to ownership, that you do have more physical presence and actionability than remedying a problem later on.
Yeah, assuming the town is the best possible steward, I mean.
Yeah, no,
I mean, would you say the town's a better steward than the trustees or the Greenbelt, or, you know?
well, again, it doesn't mean I'm not, I don't know what the ultimate end goal is gonna be of this property.
Well, that's another concern,
Yeah, I get it.
in terms of the, sort of
It's a
the
lot of money.
thoughtfulness of the
Where
plan.
did we say we're getting the money? I don't remember.
Out of the water bill, and it may be 2 years down the road, another property comes up that we really want, we're not gonna have the wherewithal to do it.
But I guess the argument here is like this, to my understanding, this is the only house that's in the lake, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, but that's fine, but then what they ought to do is be honest and say, we're gonna take the house and we're gonna tear the house down so we can do what we want.
Does that change your opinion of whether we should do it or not? I'm just curious.
No, it's actually a pretty historical thing, but I want people to be honest about it, if that's what we're doing.
And I'm not sure it's a case, John, of honest or not honest. I think it's a case of, I mean, I don't know how else to say this. It's kind of a sloppy plan. It's pieces all over the place, this and that. And I think it should, I would have more confidence in the plan if the plan said, and I don't think this is hard, this parcel is already protected. Here's how it's protected. It's greenbelt. However, there are other issues, and like John's saying, if it's tear down the house, then that's the reason we're buying it. We're tearing down the house.
So just to clarify, I believe that Greenbelt protects part of the parcel, not the whole parcel. Like they don't, Greenbelt doesn't protect the house.
No,
No.
but
Right.
you can't build another house within 250 feet.
No, but I think the argument is that not that that to build another house, it's the argument is that we don't have control of what's in said house that's actually within the lake, right?
Part of the confusion is that the case that's being made is both. Where the watershed plan says we should acquire property to protect the lake. We're gonna acquire property, land, to protect the lake. This is already protected land. To John's point, what about a year or two from now, or 5 years from now, when there's another piece of land that is not protected, that could be built on, and then, we shouldn't have spent that 1.7 million. That logic may not carry the day, but are we even thinking about that?
I think we should find alternate sources of property tax. I wonder where we could get, no. So I think those are all good points, and I think those are the things that should be discussed at town meetings, and I'd like to hear, well, at least brought up at town meeting, I guess, plan, because I thought I heard something too about maybe not necessarily tearing it down versus moving it back versus, couldn't you just knock out the basement? I mean, I don't know. Again, these are
Seal
things.
the basement, but
Right.
that's part of my point. I've heard different things too. Is it knock it down? Is it move it?
Yeah.
And
So
I don't know what I'm voting for.
Yeah, I mean, I think the vote is to authorize them to buy it and then.
And do something.
And do something, right? And that's the question is what, and I think ultimately the question comes down, do you trust that what is done with it is gonna be
I mean,
worth
the
the
only
while?
logic is the house is on sale now, and if we don't buy it now, we can't, and that's an expensive option.
It is, it's one of the
That's
difficulties.
I mean, you know, when we, I'm trying to think, we had an option one time for 30,000 for an open space parcel, and we had actually a special town meeting just for that. This is 1.7 million, and it's really just an option. It's, because you don't know what you're gonna do. There's no clear plan yet of what's gonna be done.
That's one of the tough parts about town meeting is like you can't do it, you have once a year to kind of make these decisions, and if it's not ready, that's
Well,
difficult.
there's ways around that, but, you know,
But it's not like a city where you could just next month go to the
no,
city
that's
council
true,
and,
that's true.
you
You
know.
need to bring in a third party and, you know,
Yeah.
carry the land over for a period of time, but, you know.
Okay.
And I agree with Peter's perspective with respect to that. I think there needs to be a more robust plan on this, right? But at the same token is that I look at it, it's the only property that's in the lake that we have the option, and if our remit as a planning board is to, you know, oversee the watershed, right, then I feel like that this is the opportunity to help do that and protect the lake further, right?
Even if that means crafting a plan later on, which isn't ideal, certainly, but, okay. I feel like at least we have somewhat more information, and what we'll do is we'll take a vote before town meeting, and then we'll see what else comes out at town meeting. All right, what's our next one?
Article 8.
Okay, Article 8. All right, so we'll just, again, do this, and then there was a comment which we can also display. All right, 440 Academy Road.
So with this is a PowerPoint presentation submitted by Melissa as well.
I mean, I do think, I had some concerns about this before. I've talked to a lot of people about this. I think this is okay.
Okay.
I think in the end, it's pretty benign. And we should just, it seems to be everybody's consensus, and I don't think there's, any reason to stand in the way.
Okay.
I'm sorry, we can't hear you.
Sorry, John was saying that he had raised some concerns at a previous meeting, but after speaking with some other people, thinks that it's probably worthwhile, or it's not harmful.
I think it's pretty benign, yeah.
So, I have to say that I don't understand what this is doing. I mean, I value your view of this, John, but I really don't understand it, and so let me ask one question. This is one of 3 properties acquired for $570,000.
Well, it's not required, there was a conservation restriction.
Acquired a conservation restriction. Yes, acquired a conservation restriction. What's the plan for the other 2? We're gonna do this one, and then we're gonna do the second and the third?
No,
Or we're only gonna do this
We're
one?
only going to do this one because of the location of where it is.
And what's the reason that it's just this one?
It ties a lot of things. First of all, this one specifically is the property between the church. Yeah, and, what was formerly Bob Stevens' house that Brad Wakeman owns now. And the other 2 are open fields you can get access to. This one, if you recollect, there's a stone wall and a fence.
Right.
Under the CR, the town was to have access. Originally, the plan was to put parking in there, and Center Realty Trust never did it, for a lot of reasons I don't want to get into, because I don't know what all the reasons were, but originally, the plan was to put parking there. Parking has not been put there, so Center Realty Trust is saying, we'll give the town the land, and the town can have it, and they can create public access.
And if this happens, then what happens to the parking lot
It's
option?
not clear, again, and I want to stay out of it a bit because people have maligned my character about this, but the idea is it feasible to make sense to put parking on that specific spot because of the slope of topography? And I think there's been a lot of discussion, and I didn't watch it at the select board, that maybe there's other ways to just create, open the thing up, create public access, and, for the residents of the town, and that's what we would settle with.
And as I understand it, that there was discussion originally when this when this was originally enacted with the CR about a parking lot and things like that, never got built. I don't think this doesn't require us to put in a parking
doesn't.
lot. It just gives it to the town.
But it doesn't foreclose?
Correct. It doesn't foreclose, doesn't require. It basically says the town is going to be donated the parcel. The town can't own the parcel in fee as well as the conservation restriction. So the town would need to work that out with a third party
And the
about.
third party is Greenbelt, or?
It's-
what it
it's-
says there.
I think it's being discussed with Greenbelt, so I think that's the idea. And so I think the town will consider all the different kind of options. I don't think we're required, even though parking lot was part of the original discussion, that may be a way to go. It may not be, it may be, I think the town needs to consider what really exists there, what's the best option, and what's the best way to actually get meaningful public access while still maintaining the property and the historical benefits and things like that. So I think there's a way to do it where everyone's going to be happy, and I think this is just kind of the first step of that.
Yeah.
That's how it seems.
I guess, okay, thanks, Gene. I've read this before, but I just want to read it again. And who is this memo from?
Melissa Rodriguez. Murphy.
And what do you want to do about this tonight, Tom?
Nothing. I think we'll vote on it at the town
I
meeting.
mean,
We said we
that's
would
what
vote
I
on
think
town
we
meeting.
can. I mean, I'm prepared to vote
I'd
positively.
rather look
with
at the
it.
PowerPoint
Okay, that's
presentation
fine.
again.
Okay.
I'm in favor of it, but I think where we said we're gonna make our recommendation at town meeting, we should leave it till the last day to
Okay.
vote, so.
I'd be more comfortable if we do it
That's fine.
at town meeting.
Okay.
And is that PowerPoint in our packet?
Yes, it is.
It is.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, everyone, for your input on that. And there was an abutter comment that also came in, so that's in the packet, or not an abutter comment, a public comment, so that's in the packet as well. All right, and so I think we just have meeting minutes. Can we get a motion to approve the meeting minutes from April 26th? Move. Second, all in favor. Alyssa,
Yes.
Kelly,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Peter. Okay, so next meeting, May 17th, 5:30, high school. The exact room to be determined.
Yes.
Can we have a site visit before then?
No, May 24th.
Oh, May 24th. Okay.
You get a week off next week.
I would have shown up by myself.
Could we get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
We get a second.
A second.
All in favor, Alyssa,
Yes.
Kelly,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Peter.
Aye.
I vote yes. Thank you, everybody.